Recognizing a quorum, I am calling this meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order at 10 o'clock on Monday, February 26, 2018. There are no microphones here, so can I ask if everybody can hear me in the back of the room? Yes, thank you. May I ask if is anybody recording this meeting? Thank you. Let me put the public on notice, therefore, that this meeting is being recorded. We have a pretty full day for the next 3 days, so let me get right into it. After a couple of comments, we do not have any minutes from previous meetings to approve today, so we're going to skip that agenda item and get right into the meat of it, which is a discussion of policies and draft regulations, and I'll talk about the process that we'll use for that when we get there. Just one introductory announcement before we get started. I'd like to welcome the newest member of the commission, who I think picked the perfect day to join, particularly in the role that he is joining us in, which is Cedric Sinclair, our Director of Communications. Mr. Executive Director, would you introduce Cedric and some background, please?
Sure. So again, Cedric Sinclair has joined the commission as of today, as of this morning. Welcome. Cedric comes to us from UMass Boston and has a deep and robust experience in communications, in marketing, branding, and actually for a bit taught as an adjunct faculty at Emerson, correct?
Yes.
So we're very excited to have Cedric. Hopefully he'll be here tomorrow as well, so as today goes well. But we are, as you know, growing by the week. So welcome.
Thank you. Welcome aboard, Cedric. I don't see her here, but given that Cedric is now our permanent Director of Communications, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Dot Joyce, who has been our acting Director of Communications from kind of week 3 of our commission, and I just wanted to acknowledge her contribution. I will say that Dot and I didn't always see eye to eye on everything, but I learned a lot from her. I think she was dedicated to the success of the commission and each of us individually, and so I just wanted to thank her for her role. She is going to stay on contractually for a few days to kind of help Cedric get up to speed, but I did want to acknowledge her contribution. So thank you. Let's get into the meat of the agenda. I want to again thank everybody that submitted public comments to the commission over the last few weeks. I want to thank everybody that showed up to our 10 statewide hearings, public hearings on this issue, as well as those elected and appointed officials that contributed their thoughts as well. We have endeavored to listen to everybody, to read everything that was submitted, and to take everything that was submitted under serious consideration regardless of who the submitter was. And so I just wanted to thank everybody. It was I think a robust process. I know it certainly caused me to think about things and to reconsider things, and I presume the same is true for the other commissioners. So thank you for that. The process is going to be that we have 3 days this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, of public commission meetings. We will go through every regulation and talk about whether the feedback that we got causes us to reconsider any of the policies that we decided on in December. During these 3 days, today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, we will not be discussing regulations or language of regulations or technical issues. We will do that next week. Today, tomorrow, and Wednesday is only to discuss policies and whether we feel like we need to revisit any of those policies. We will use the regulations as the draft regulations as published by the Secretary of State as a sequencing device. So we'll literally go through those regulations one by one and talk about whether we need to discuss any of those policies underlying those regulations. And we'll take as long as it takes. We have 3 days scheduled for this, just like in December. I am completely unable to forecast whether we're going to need all 3 of those days or not. It really is going to be a question of how many things we debate and the length of those debates. And I am not going to shorten any of those debates. We're going to talk about them until we're comfortable that it's time to take a vote on those policies. Unlike the process that we used in December, I am not asking any of the commissioners to make a recommendation on an issue that's in their lane. When we voted on and approved draft regulations in November, they became commission regulations, not mine or Commissioner Doyle's. And so we're just going to talk about them. Nobody on the commission is in a position or should feel responsible for defending or advocating based upon the work that they did earlier. We'll just talk about it. I might ask for some help from one of the commissioners to elucidate the issues. We have tried to compile all of the feedback that we got. It was an enormous amount of feedback, and so there's some of the issues that were raised that I just need some help getting elucidated by one of the commissioners, but that's the only kind of proprietary role I'm asking the individual commissioners to take. We are scheduled today to go until 3. We'll, I'm sure, find a convenient time to take a break. We probably will not take a lunch break just because I think given where we are today, it'd be hard to reconvene after a lunch break. So we'll power through this as well as we can, but we will take a break or two along the way. I'd like to ask my fellow commissioners whether they have any comments or opening statements they'd like to make before we get into this. Okay, so let's do it. I have made 3 changes to the sequence of regulations that are in the draft that was published by the Secretary of State, and let me just tell you what they are ahead of time for those of you that are following the sequence on your computers. One is very early on in the regulations we have fees and fines. I have pulled that till later in the conversation until we have gone through the list of all the license categories, just because it doesn't make sense to talk about fees and fines until we have agreed on what license categories we're going to authorize. So that is one change I've made to the sequence. Second change to the sequence is that there are several different places that the role and rights of municipalities are contained in the draft regulations, and so what I've done is taken them all out, put them at the end of the agenda so that we can discuss the entirety of municipality responsibilities and rights. So that's going to be a little bit out of sequence. And then the third thing that I've also pulled out and put at the end is environmental issues. We just met with EEA recently. We're waiting for some feedback from them on a couple of things. So we're going to leave that towards the end of the agenda. But other than that, I think the sequence is straightforward. It's exactly what the sequence looks like in the Secretary of State's listing of our draft regulations. So unless there are any questions or comments, let's get into it. Hopefully, this is not the best room in the world. We were a little desperate, but hopefully everybody can see what's on the screen, including, do you have your glasses?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. And what I'm going to do is just go through line by line where an issue came up from our compilation of the feedback. We'll talk about the issue, and then we'll talk about whether we need to discuss this or leave the draft regulations as they currently exist. Some of these definitions we can probably put into next week's conversation because they might be in the realm of technical changes. But I just wanted to put them up, and we can agree, as I said, to defer them to next week's conversation if that makes sense. And again, as I go through this, or as I ask any commissioner to elucidate, I'm not defending, I'm not advocating, I'm just explicating so that we can agree to discuss it or not. Starting with the first definition, which is the use of the term marijuana. We got a fair amount of feedback saying that term should be replaced by cannabis given its negative connotations. And so just put up for debate whether we should consider changing the word marijuana in the regulations to cannabis. I will point out that the legislation that is driving us uses the phrase marijuana, but it was a frequent enough piece of feedback I thought I'd put it on the table for discussion. Anybody feel that we should discuss changing the terminology? Dot, your timing is really bad. I just said some really nice things about you.
Well, I'm glad I'm late.
Commissioner Tyler?
So I deeply appreciate the people who brought this to our attention and who felt that we should have this conversation publicly. I think it's a really important one to have. I believe the only other state that has had this conversation and made the change was Maryland. I think it's a very important conversation. I personally support using both words, cannabis and marijuana, in a scientific context. I feel we should use cannabis. In a cultural context, I feel we should use marijuana. I get my thoughts on this from who I believe is a national thought leader on this, who happens to be just 2 feet away from my face by coincidence, who is Sonia Espinoza, who has done some excellent writing and speaking on this subject. The fact that the word marijuana has a Mexican origin was used to promote racist policies, but that doesn't mean that the word itself is racist. So I would support taking the word back. I think that specifically making a change to only use the word cannabis is an unintentional whitewashing of the word. I think that rather than erasing that history, we should keep using the word marijuana, and we should remember the racist origins of the Marijuana Tax Act that took place in the 30s, and that we take seriously our commitment to remember those origins, and that we respect the cultural history that the plant has been used around the world in different cultures for thousands of years. So I recommend that we keep it the same.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a problem with using either. My question is, I mean, given the fact that the language is in the statute and we have to sort of balance that, is there a way to put marijuana/cannabis so that, like Commissioner Title said, when we're using scientifically, either word can be used? I think that the conversation has been had in the legislature, the conversation has been had with the ballot question. I think as regulators, it's our job just to regulate the industry and not get into the history of all of these things, and just to make sure that we do what's right for Massachusetts. So my question would be, instead of striking it, is there a way just to hyphenate it or use both for documentation purposes?
Yeah, I guess Commissioner Title would suggest using both depending on the context rather than hyphenate, which I think is a little simpler. But any other? I'm fine with that. But I want to get other comments, or are we okay with Commissioner Title's suggestion?
I greatly appreciate Commissioner Title's thoughts, and I would concur with her.
So, thank you for being here, General Counsel Bailey.
Yes.
Do we need to vote on that, or?
Well, the only thing I would say is that I think in terms of having kind of consistent and clear regulations, it's important to it's okay to have both the terms in there, but I would prioritize a term and try to use that consistently. I think you're going to create confusion and complexity where you may not want to by bouncing back and forth between the terms. So if there could be some discussion on maybe prioritizing one of those terms, or I can help the commission to make that decision, if that's helpful.
What do you think?
If you want to help the commission make that decision, that's
Okay.
fine.
So actually, thank you for answering a question that I didn't ask, but it was a good question. But the question I did ask is, do we need to vote on what we just decided?
I think if you're, given what's there right now, I do not think so.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, too, the point was raised about kind of the regulations and the law. I think it's important as we develop policies internally as a commission that we use terms.
Yes.
I want to make sure, especially now we have a communications director on staff, that we are sensitive to
Yes.
to the history of words, and we develop policies and consistent use of terms whenever we produce materials, whether it be press releases, guidance, you name it. That's a priority that I want.
Absolutely agree. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on to the next topic, which is define canopy. Is this a technical correction, Commissioner Doyle? Or?
I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with what I'm proposing, which is similar to what we discussed when we were discussing cultivation back in December. But we didn't have an actual definition, which is just sheer oversight, not anything deliberate. I looked at the different definitions that have been used in the other states, and obviously we had people commenting on it and recommending. It seems that California has a pretty detailed definition. I can read it out loud if people would like to, because obviously it does have some policy implications, what's included in the word canopy, because that's what we're measuring the tiers by. So the Californian definition is canopy means the designated area or areas at a licensed premises, except nurseries. We'll get into the language later. I'm not sure about that part of it, but that will contain mature plants at any point in time. Canopy shall be calculated in square feet and measured using clearly identifiable boundaries of all areas that will contain mature plants at any point in time, including all of the space within the boundaries. Canopy may be non-contiguous, but each unique area included in the total canopy calculation shall be separated by an identifiable boundary, which includes, but are not limited to, interior walls, shelves, greenhouse walls, hoop house walls, garden benches, hedgerows, fencing, garden beds, or garden plots. And if mature plants are being cultivated using a shelving system, the surface area of each level shall be included in the total canopy calculation. So I think California's definition is consistent with what we discussed in December. So that's what I propose to put in the final regulations.
I agree.
Once again, General Counsel, do we need to vote on that, or?
I would vote on that, yes, because it does have legal.
Great. So can I have a motion to approve the California language defining canopy?
Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Title made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show the Commission unanimously approved that. Thank you very much, Commissioner Doyle. Next definition is existing licensee transporter. Again, is that a technical issue or one that we need to discuss?
That's actually more technical.
Okay.
It just makes clear what the definition
It's
is.
fine. So, well, again, we're going to leave this. Excuse me. We're going to leave this to next week. So can we make sure that we have that on our list? Define existing licensee transporter. We're leaving to next week. It's technical. Amend definition of marijuana or cannabis products, and this is about whether they get treated as food. So, Commissioner, this one sounds like it's substantive, if I'm correct?
It is substantive.
Yep.
So we, just as background, in the medical use marijuana program, edibles are not treated as food. Back in 2012, 2013, local boards of health were not ready to have to take on an entire industry and didn't have any funding to inspect them. So the decision was made to essentially import the sanitary requirements for food preparation into the DPH regulations and have the DPH marijuana inspectors inspect for sanitary requirements and issues rather than pushing it on to boards of health that didn't have the funding to do it. When we did the draft regulations, my hope was in the interest of making the industry more integrated into the mainstream inspections process, that we wouldn't have to do that. Unfortunately, we got feedback from DPH that with the constraints they have on their food protection program, they did not feel that they would be able to do the wholesale product manufacturing inspections that they would be required to do if we made edibles food. So I think what we're going to have to do, at least for the time being, is emulate what happened with the medical use of marijuana program, and consistent with that program, for the moment, say that edibles are not food. We shall have to hire inspectors to do the training, etc., for sanitary compliance with sanitary requirements. That will also mean that the local boards of health, again, do not have the ability under our regulations to inspect for retail food sanitation requirements. They can, however, if they are interested in inspecting in their municipality, they can pass local regulations that would authorize them to do it. So it's essentially balancing constraints on existing state agencies, dealing with the situation on the ground now, and maybe looking to the future to see if we can do something different long term. But in the short term, I think this is just a necessary change we have to make.
Any comments? That sounds reasonable to me. Once again, can you please just, I need continuing guidance about what we need to vote on and what
Yes.
we don't. Yes?
I would vote on that, yes.
So can I have a motion to approve Commissioner Doyle's recommendation?
So moved.
Okay, I think that Commissioner Title beat Commissioner McBride by a nanosecond, so Commissioner Title made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner McBride. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show that this was unanimously approved. Thank you very much, Commissioner Doyle. Next definition is amend the definition of microbusiness. Is this something we should wait till the conversation about authorizing this licensed category, or should we talk about it now?
I think so. It was basically the discussion that was brought up in the comment about, if they're not vertically integrated, does there need to be a limit on product manufacturing? So I think that's more in the license category, don't you?
Right, I think we should wait.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll defer that. No, we're going to get into that very shortly, so we'll put that off. Then define owner. Again, I'm going to need your help, Commissioner Doyle, I believe.
That wasn't me.
Who wrote this?
This actually was one that I put on, but I'd
Okay.
like to defer it until we talk a little bit more about, there may be some other language that I'm
Fine.
contemplating marijuana establishments.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll just defer that. Thank you. Okay, with respect to .030, registration of marijuana establishment agents, there were no issues that I'm aware of. Is that correct?
You just
Pardon?
Okay.
With respect to .031 and .032, denial of registration card and revocation of registration card, there was a comment about adding discretionary language. I don't know where that came from. Can someone help me on that?
Proceed. So this is an issue about adding discretionary, giving
Discretion.
clarifying that the commission has discretion with regard to certain decisions, and I'm going to defer
To our general counsel.
Absolutely. A number of commenters have indicated that there's not any opportunities, or there's very few opportunities in the regulations for the commission to exercise discretion in terms of both approving of applicants for registration cards and also for licenses. Traditionally, for regulatory agencies, there is this reserving of discretion. The reason for that is that you cannot anticipate all the circumstances that may come up when you're reviewing applications. So my strong recommendation would be that the commission make an effort to include that in the regs, both during the application process and also in the event that there needs to be some sort of disciplinary action. I have shared some language with two of the commissioners that I believe speaks to what I'm suggesting. It's reflective of some of the categories that the commission included in the original draft, but it also adds a provision that basically gives the commission the opportunity, or its designee, to make a discretionary decision and also to make a decision based on the likelihood that an applicant or someone who is holding a card or a license is not acting consistent with the purposes of the statute.
Mm-hmm. So that would be something that we could get into when we go through the actual proposed final regulations next week.
Well, I think because you're making a substantive change,
Yep.
it's worthy of discussion and
Okay.
it's worthy of a vote.
Great, thank you. Any comments or thoughts? Commissioner Todd?
With regard to licensing and penalties, I would be fine with that. With regard to applications, as we've talked about offline, I'm pretty uncomfortable with the idea in general. And I'm not one of the commissioners that you've shared the language with, right? Because I know we've talked about it offline, but I didn't see any particular language.
This language, really, I just developed this weekend, so I did not have the opportunity to share it with the entire commission. I could either pull up the language, or Commissioner McBride or Doyle could speak to that language. But I'm sorry, Commissioner Titleman.
It's
You're
really just
concerned about
a
the-
fact-specific question for me. I feel that I can understand the need for discretionary language, but it would need to be so specific that it should address the conduct for it to be something that we would make a denial decision for outside of what we've already laid out as objective factors. It should be so severe that there should be some way to address that in the specifics rather than just a staff decision or a compliance person decision. So I would really just need to see the language.
So why don't we do this? Would you circulate the language to the other commissioners? I haven't seen it. I'll put it on the agenda for first thing tomorrow morning.
Great.
Okay, if you
I
can.
will.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just?
Yeah,
weigh
please
in?
go ahead.
I actually, I think that Commissioner Title makes a very good point that it's language that we need to be careful about how we tailor it, because it really is going to go to the heart of many of the decisions that we're going to be making. So I think that we need to approach it with a lot of care and make sure that it's language that we feel we can use that's going to further what we're trying to do, instead of it being something that's going to sort of be a reason to take away things, right? So I think that it's very fair that we all sort of get a chance to take a look and make sure that, you know, there's a comfort level, because it's a big decision, and discretion it's something that administrative agencies should have, but it's also something that needs to be used with a lot of care.
Okay, so thank you both, and thank you, Christine. We'll get that on the agenda for tomorrow. So I think that finishes the first slide. Sorry, this is small print. I apologize for this. Dot 040, which is on the leadership program. The issue is changes to energy and environmental leader. Is this something that we should?
We can talk about this one now. It was
Okay.
more cultivation that we needed to put off for tomorrow rather than specifically energy. As the chairman mentioned, we got some feedback from the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs on a number of different issues, one of which was on the energy and environmental leadership category criteria. And just to refresh the room in case people don't remember, the idea with the energy and environmental leader category and leadership categories in general is this is something that would be looked at upon the annual renewal of a license rather than something that will be looked at immediately. So this is something that we're going to be evaluating in 2019 or 2020 rather than 2018. And for the energy and environmental leadership category, they had some specific objections because what we had before was relatively vague because we were waiting for the energy and environmental work group to get going for more specifics. And they had some things they suggested that we could get going right away so that people had a chance to maybe earn the right to claim this category. And I'll read it as it would be. So energy and environmental leader in the year preceding the date of application for a leader rating. The criteria would be that the licensee has met or exceeded its energy and environmental impact goals for its registration period, that the licensee has consistently documented and complied with best management practices for energy use, waste disposal, and environmental impact, that the licensee has documented that renewable energy credits representing 100% of the licensee's energy usage has been retired, and the licensee has labeled all their products as being produced using 100% renewable energy. So obviously, leadership category is a goal, it's aspirational, it's not something that's necessarily going to be easy for everybody to do, but that is what the Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs thought should be the objective for someone who wanted to be a leader in the category.
Comments? Commissioner Powell?
First, I want to thank the EEA. I thought their letter was really helpful. I really appreciated the specific feedback, and I think these are excellent recommendations. I just have two small suggestions for changes. Under A, the licensee has met or exceeded its energy and environmental impact goals for its registration period. I think we just need to create a way for them to send us their goals in advance.
Yes. And we'll get into the discussion. I think one of the things they wanted, if I'm remembering correctly, Commissioner Title can help me out, or General Counsel, or the Executive Director, they wanted reporting on energy issues as part of their suggested add to our regulations. So I think it may end up getting folded into that. We have to just figure out what the outset is and then the reporting on those.
Yeah, that's on the agenda for later. So
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last one, the licensee has labeled all their products as being produced using 100% renewable energy. We asked some of the EEA about this during our meeting, and we talked about situations where there may not be renewable energy available because the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't going. So I would suggest we reduce that from 100% to 75 or 80%.
If I may share, the EEA is going to hopefully get back to us by tomorrow with a suggested percentage, but we could put a placeholder in for now if that's
can actually do that specific issue, I think, when it even
Actually-
comes to the language part, because it's just changing that number. You think?
Should we not vote on it then? We'll just come back and put in the number and then vote on it?
Whatever.
Yeah, let's vote on it. Let's get the number settled, then we'll vote on it next week in terms of the final language. Is that okay?
I'm not sure. Are you saying vote now or vote later?
I was proposing we vote later.
Okay.
Yeah. When we get the final language. And so I'm sorry, it seems like we're deferring pretty much everything, but we'll start making some decisions. But let's defer that. And speaking of deferral, so cultivation got a large number of comments, as I guess nobody should be surprised. I'm going to just talk about the issues at a high level, but again, I'm going to propose that we might want to postpone this until tomorrow. So one issue was the caps that we had placed on co-ops. One is about how co-ops move from level to level, how anybody moves from level to level. We got some feedback on the 85% requirement before somebody could change tiers. We got feedback on putting in a cap on total canopy per license. We were asked to consider creating licenses for people that wanted to sell seeds or clones to cultivators. The environmental standards we just talked about. It was suggested that we add requirements to approving somebody or an entity as a co-op, and then provide guidance for the waiver process for small farmers. The environmental standards, we are waiting from EEA to get a proposal on that, which they have not yet promised, but we're going to try to get them to get this by the end of the day. Commissioner Doyle suggested that it probably makes sense to postpone the entire cultivation conversation until tomorrow, so we can have a complete conversation on all these issues given the input from EEA. So unless there are objections, we'll do cultivation first thing tomorrow morning, presuming we get the input from EEA. Is that acceptable to everybody? Okay. So I think the next one is not going to be deferred. And again, we're now in .050. So these are this is a section where we define those types of marijuana establishments that we will license. So cultivation is the first of those. Second is micro business, and there's an issue about whether we require micro businesses to cultivate, and whether we put a cap on the volume of product manufacturing that micro businesses are allowed to generate. So, required to cultivate. I think it's a pretty straightforward issue. I don't know if anybody has any additional elucidation on that, but are there comments on that issue? Go ahead, Commissioner Tom.
Do you mind if I take the two issues together?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, I don't. Excuse me. Absolutely, I do not mind. Go ahead.
Okay. So we got a lot of feedback on this, which I appreciate. And after listening to the feedback, my feeling is that the micro business should be able to either cultivate the limited amount and deliver, or manufacture and deliver, or cultivate and manufacture and deliver. The question that came up was, if you are choosing to manufacture and deliver, how do you ensure that you're still a micro business with an equivalent amount of product that you are purchasing and then manufacturing, so you don't have a loophole where you can buy an unlimited amount and manufacture it. So we received a lot of feedback on that. I asked about 10 people I considered to be cultivation experts, and the average that I got was 2,000 pounds per year as a purchase limit, to be equivalent to the micro business cultivation limit of 5,000 square feet.
That makes sense to me. I don't know what others think. Hey, I just want to apologize. I can see all these people kind of crouching in the corner. I truly want to apologize for the fact that this was the only meeting room we could find, and obviously if we don't have enough capacity, we're going to be in bigger rooms tomorrow and Wednesday, but I apologize for the inconvenience. Any comments on Commissioner Title's suggestion? Can I have a motion then to approve Commissioner House recommendation. Again, we'll put it into language and we will vote on the final regulation next week. So we don't need to worry about the language, just the concept right now. Can I have a second?
Second.
Let the record show that Commissioner Title made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor? Aye. Would you like to discuss this more, Commissioner Title?
Yeah.
Pardon? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. We can.
I think that the presumption here is that as we go along, if there are things that change in an underlying factor,
Yep.
that we're going to be coming back and addressing anything that we're sort of deciding.
Yes.
Now, it's one of those things, right, where you kind of squeeze at one end, it comes out the other, you need to figure out
Yep.
where, if you change
Yep.
things along the way.
Yep.
So
Right.
then I think,
Yeah, aye.
Okay, let the record show that this motion was approved unanimously by the Commission. Thank you. I am not aware of any issues that were raised with respect to the licensing category manufacturing. This, again, is not about operating requirements. This is just about whether we license this category and any constraints on those licenses. So I'm not aware of any issues. Is that correct? Or? Okay. And let me move on. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
just before we sort of move on, I have one question that goes to kind of the general, I guess one issue that
Right.
goes to the general overlying
Please.
marijuana establishments. And this was brought up in several comments where there's this tension between, it goes to who's owner, controlling person,
Yep.
A close associate, and also the issue of one individual not holding more than 3 licenses in any category, which we talked about back in December, and we want to be very careful and make sure that we are really hewing to that strict requirement, because that is going to present the most opportunities for the widest range of individuals to be involved in the industry. So with that in mind, I would suggest an addition, and this is in 500.0501B, which was formerly capital A2, which currently states that no licensee shall be granted more than 3 licenses in a particular class except as otherwise specified in 935 CMR 500. An independent testing laboratory or standards laboratory may not have a license in any other class. No individual or entity shall be a controlling person over more than 3 licenses in a particular class of license. I would propose editing that final sentence, stating the limit on licenses in the following way. So, no individual, corporation, or other entity shall be in a position to control the decision-making of more than 3 licenses in a particular class of license. An individual, corporation, or entity shall be determined to be in a position to control the decision-making of a marijuana establishment if the individual or entity possesses 1, actual control, more than 50% of the voting equity, or has the power to appoint more than 50% of directors, 2, contract rights to control, or 3, right to veto significant events. The Commission, and then this additional sentence will, when we get into the application process, I'll reference it there too, but the Commission shall receive notice of any such interests as part of the application pursuant to 500.101. So I drafted this in a way, the intent of it really is to try to get at anyone who is going to be significantly involved in the direction of a marijuana establishment. There needs to be limitations so that we don't have kind of one large entity maybe having its hand in 4 or 5 or 10 licenses. And the second piece of it is so that we are notified up front, and this is where we'll get to the application requirements, we're notified up front about where there might be conflicts of interest or where there might be a dabbling in multiple establishments, so that we, as a commission, when we're making those licensing decisions, really understand how fully one entity or individual is involved in the industry that we are regulating. So this may be something where the language of it we need to talk about and actually defer to you, Mr. Chairman, because you have a background in corporations and governance that I don't have, but I think that it's something that I would like for us to think about.
Yeah, no, first of all, I appreciate that. And second of all, I actually agree with what I understand to be the intent of your proposal. I think that's right. I think that's the right way to ensure that we do adhere to the limits that we're trying to. So I support that. I don't want to comment on the specific language, but in terms of the intent, I completely support that.
I'm happy to circulate the language to the general counsel and the director so that they can, do what they need to do.
Right.
with it.
I have a question, if it's an appropriate time to ask.
And if it's not, you're going to go ahead anyway.
I wasn't sure if you were, I didn't want to cut you off.
That's fine.
The one question I guess I would have is how it would play out with consultants / contractors. There are often the same contractors over and over again helping, particularly with cultivation, because obviously legal cultivation of marijuana in Massachusetts has only been around for such a period of time. There are consultants from other states who service a number of companies. So I would be concerned about limiting their ability to provide the services as long as we were clear that their potential influence is different than actually having the power, because obviously, they may have certain influence on a number of companies because they're telling them how to grow.
Right.
I think that that's fair, and it may be something that we can
Treat the language.
work.
Yeah.
I thought the language that Commissioner McGrath was suggesting would take care of that, but maybe we
I think it does too, but I just wanted to flag the issue because I just want to have that lens in our heads when we look at it.
Other comments on that?
Conceptually, I'm completely on board. I think that whatever language we write, of course, people are going to try to abuse it. So
That's cynical.
that's probably the most cynical thing I've said yet, huh? I would definitely defer to the chairman and the executive director and the general counsel as for drafting this in a way that we get the most information and try to prevent people from skirting that 3 license requirement.
So I think this is something that it's okay that we put into next week's agenda, ask the general counsel with input from Commissioner McBride to come up with a draft, and we'll talk about that when we review our final regulations next week. Is that fair? Great.
Would it be possible for us to see that before the meeting?
I think the whole intent, excuse me for interrupting, the whole intent, we put a little bit more time between these meetings and our review of the draft regulations than we did last time. So the whole intent would be as quickly as possible, and obviously we're going to need to hear from our general counsel on this, is to take the output from these meetings today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, and turn them over as quick as possible to give each of us time to review the proposed final regulations before we discuss them next week. So the answer is yes, and I think it's a question of how much we end up putting on Christine's plate before or by the end of Wednesday.
I think the other good news, though, is that as we talk about it and it becomes part of the public record, then we've sort of, we've kind of shared what the language is, so that now, as we circulate it.
Yeah.
I would ask, Mr. Chair, if any of the commissioners have language that they want to share with me, that they do so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that, I think, do you have any other general comments on .50 before we get into specifics? Okay. So let's talk about delivery, and if it's okay, I'll explicate this because I think I was responsible for a lot of the confusion that I think exists out in the world on this topic. And this is a complicated topic, not just because we got a ton of feedback on it, which we did, but because there are a lot of different ways to approach this. So what we said in our draft regulations, just as a kind of a starting point, and please correct me, any commissioner or Christine, if I'm wrong, is that we said that with a retail license, we would allow delivery. We had very specific operational requirements, which we're not going to talk about now. We'll talk about shortly. But with a retail license, we would authorize. Is that, you want to do a sound check? We would authorize delivery. So that was kind of the starting point. We additionally discussed other things, including that if you had a license for cultivation or manufacturing, and applied in addition for a retail license that you could deliver from your cultivation establishment or your manufacturing establishment without a brick and mortar retail operation. You have to get the retail license, but you did not have to have a brick and mortar retail establishment if you had another marijuana enterprise license for cultivation or for manufacturing. We discussed and explicitly did not authorize just giving somebody a retail license with no brick and mortar and allowing them to do home delivery. We had that conversation and we agreed not to authorize pure delivery services. I'm not defending anything, I'm not debating anything, I'm just trying to put the playing field or level the playing field out there. So that is what we agreed to in our draft regulations that were promulgated in December. There are many options here, including the ones that I just articulated, but one option is that we do not allow for home delivery for anybody, including those retail licensees that have brick and mortar retail licenses. That is an option. We can defer licensing retail for delivery or defer allowing for delivery. We can continue with what we articulated in our draft regulations in December, which is to say that we can allow somebody that has a marijuana enterprise license, establishment license in cultivation or manufacturing to additionally apply for, and if they receive a retail license, to allow them to deliver from their cultivation or manufacturing facility without a brick and mortar retail, but they do have to have a retail license. That's where we are right now, and so we can continue that. One of the ideas that came up in some of the feedback sessions, at least that I participated in, was that we could create a new category of license, which would be essentially a delivery service license. So you would not need to get a retail license. You could get a delivery license, but the requirement would be that you would only deliver based on product that you purchased from a licensed retailer. So that somebody could essentially deliver, but only product that was sold by a licensed retailer. So essentially be a delivery service, so some licensed retailers, if we allow for delivery, would set up their own delivery operations, but we would create a license category that people could do it as a service to retailers, for those retailers who didn't want to do it themselves. And I'm not, again, advocating as much as putting on the table an option there. We had
May I make a point of clarification
Sure.
on that? Reading from our public policy discussion votes
Yep.
that were distributed, we did also decide on the delivery standalone licenses to not allow the license category, but to refer it to the Cannabis Advisory Board
Right.
and issue recommendations by October 31st, 2018
Right.
on that subject.
So thank you very much for that addition. So it's certainly something that we can continue to do. We had obviously a lot of input, as I said, on this topic, including don't allow for home delivery, only allow for home delivery from brick and mortar retailers, to have a pilot program to limit the number of licenses, to put licenses out at a later date tied to some other measurable benchmarks. And then there were some operational suggestions in terms of requirements for ascertation that the person that was being delivered to was indeed the person that should be delivered to, and they were an appropriate age. Other operational requirements, which I think we'll come back to. But I think the broader issue is, do we allow for home delivery, and if so, under what specific circumstances of licensing? I will add two other issues, and then I think it's we should get into it. But two other issues that we discussed, or one that we discussed, one that we did not. We did discuss whether delivery should be limited to the municipality in which the retail license was held, and we agreed that we would not limit it in that respect, even though, as I mentioned at the time, Oregon does have that restriction. And then something that's come up subsequently, given the actions of some towns and cities around the state, is if we allow for a retail licensee to deliver outside of the municipality in which they're licensed, should we allow them to deliver into towns that have banned retail stores in those towns? And again, I'm not advocating as much as putting issues on the table. That's kind of, I think, the full gamut of things that we heard. We're not doing things based upon the number of comments we got on particular topics, but I will say that this is not the top topic, certainly in the top 3 in terms of the number of comments and the amount of feedback we got. So this is obviously an important and sensitive issue. I think I will pause at this moment and ask for comments from my fellow commissioners. I do think this is something that we need to talk through. So.
Everyone's like, who goes
Yeah,
first?
who's brave enough to go first there? I'll go first, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So can I have a volunteer for somebody to go first on this?
Oh, geez, all right.
Okay, good job. Thank you, Commissioner Doyle. I want everybody to recognize the bravery Commissioner Doyle is showing right now.
Well, I get the benefit of going first in a lot of our things alphabetically on the website, et cetera, so I should take the lumps with the benefits, I think, go first on this one. So I think I had originally been in favor of delivery because I think DPH has a good track record with delivery in the medical program, as far as I know. What I think I failed to appreciate when I was originally thinking about this was the fact that you do have the additional safeguard of the medical marijuana registration card and the ability to track someone's patient status when you're delivering. That allows you to ensure that you are delivering to the correct person, that the ID is real, and you have some additional safeguards that we're not going to have when we are delivering to the adult market, because we're statutorily prohibited from collecting the kind of information that would make it a little bit safer. We can't ask people to sign up for delivery membership because we can't ask retailers to collect information about the customers. And so my comfort level, safety-wise, with the medical program's delivery has not translated over to the adult use market, and I am concerned about compliance and ID checking, and I don't feel like I have enough information at this point. And it's the problem with being on this aggressive timeline is that we have limited bandwidth, we have limited ability to research issues in the time that we've been given. I am not yet at a point where I feel comfortable saying that we have these problems solved. We have an answer, we have a solution for the compliance problem, especially where if we're looking at people opening up in the summer, we may not have sufficient staff to do compliance checking. So I think where I'm at is I would like to defer consideration of a delivery style license, and this is not limited, I should clarify, to brick and mortar. Or no brick and mortar,
Right.
Whatever we're calling this license category, I'm saying across the board. So existing RMDs that are delivering on the medical program side, I am also saying I would like to defer their ability to deliver on the adult side until I have a greater comfort level, and not to make it all about me. We all have a greater comfort level on this sort of safety and ID checking issue. So I don't know how long to defer to, and I'm wondering if we can avail ourselves of the expertise that we have on the Cannabis Advisory Board to help work on this issue, because we have representatives of law enforcement, we have representatives of industry that may have answers for us. But I do think we need to get those answers first, and I don't feel like we have them yet. So I would suggest deferring delivery as a part of anybody's service until a later date. And we should talk about when that date is, but that's my comment.
So can I just thank you again for
Being brave?
Yeah, no, seriously. I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you. Anything else? Again, I'm happy to go. I'm trying to be deferential here. So.
I am going to agree with what Commissioner Doyle just said. I will acknowledge that I am interested in making sure that we can do what we need to do in the short term and do it really well. And while I think we have made giant strides with, many thanks to our executive director and the staff that we have brought on thus far. I am not confident that we are going to be in a place on the same day that we can open a brick and mortar establishment to also be regulating this category. I want to see how things develop here. I want to see what mistakes we make, how we address them. We are responsible for this. We are responsible for regulating this. Mistakes that get made, we own them, and we all understand that. But that's a major responsibility. And my comfort level is in making sure that we're doing what we can to establish a strong and sensible and well-regulated industry at the outset. And I think that everyone who's going to be involved in this industry benefits from that approach to this, because if there are a lot of people who would like for this to fail, and I think I would prefer not to give opportunity to fail. And I feel like my capacity as an individual commissioner is to look at what we can do well, do that, and then unwrap the rest of it, and be able to put into place again sensible and applicable regulations that are going to provide us with the best set table that we can in terms of regulatory structure ability to regulate it.
Thank you, Commissioner McBride. I just, first of all, really appreciate what you said, particularly with respect to the responsibility and accountability. I think we all feel that. I know it's a pretty heavy weight on my shoulders, and I'm certain for the other commissioners as well. So I appreciate you saying that. This is a big responsibility, and we are doing everything we can, I believe, collectively and individually to get this right. But I believe that we're going to learn, and we have to be accountable and adaptable based upon that learning. So thank you very much for that.
So I had voted previously against delivery-only retail. I still stand behind that vote. I think that, as been said before by both Commissioner McBride and Commissioner Doyle, we need to get this right. I think we've been very good in the fact that this commission has been transparent since the first day that we were appointed and brought together, and the fact that we have gotten so much comment from the public, and the fact that we're having these discussions today proves that we're listening. And so people have had an opportunity to be part of this conversation from day one. I think that, overall, as we start to talk about what we see in Massachusetts and what this is going to look like in Massachusetts, we need to be cognizant of the fact that on day one, we want to have regulations in place that, one, reflect the will of the voters, but also reflect the landscape of Massachusetts. And I think that hearing from a variety of different people brings me to the fact that I want us to be able to take whatever short amount of time we're given, because again, this has been done sort of at a sprint's pace, not a marathon's pace, and to get it done right. And we're trying to balance question 4 with the statute, with what we're hearing today. And in the research that I've done since the time that I've been here, one of the first things the states will all tell me that have done this before us is what they did wrong. And I don't necessarily want to be telling everybody who comes after us what we did wrong, but what we did right, and how we took the action, we took the hits, we took the criticism to do it right and to make sure that it's right for Massachusetts. I think we have to be careful when we're drafting these regulations on how far we're expanding before we even start on day one. I mean, I think, there's a lot of people that confuse medicinal marijuana with adult use marijuana, and today, they interchange those words almost to the fact that they don't know that there's a difference. And so, talking about adult use marijuana and what we're going to see and what we're going to have in our neighborhoods, we need to listen to the neighborhoods as well. because the fact is that this is here. It's not going anywhere. It's, hopefully we have a set of regulations that allows this industry to be productive for decades to come, while understanding that there are some people, as it's been said, who are looking for this to fail. So I think that I'm proud of the work the Commission's done, and I think the conversations that we have are difficult, but that we've taken them on, and we've taken them on with sort of the tenor that we know this falls on us. There are 5 people in Massachusetts this is going to fall on. And no matter what the headline is, no matter what is said in the streets, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about public safety. I'm concerned about public health. I'm concerned that, someone could lose their life while someone who's driving under the influence, no matter if it's this substance or a medical substance or alcohol or what have you. I take that to heart. And that's what I've built my career on, so this is no different. And I just hope that when we go forward, we think about that.
Thank you. Tanya. You or Megan?
Okay. I think there's a solution here that could address all of these concerns. I would support a delay on delivery. And if it's okay, I actually feel the same way about delivery as I do about social consumption. So if I may address both at the same time.
Sure, save us some time.
Yeah, because I have a lot to say, so I want to do it quick. So I have 2 major caveats. One is more theoretical, and one is more policy. So when I went through all of the feedback, which I'm so grateful for, especially from the public that took the time out from their jobs, from their evenings, to write us and tell us what their concerns were. When I looked at all of that, and I looked at all of the feedback from organizations and from agencies, regardless of whether there is any merit to the underlying arguments for a need to delay these licenses, I felt it was clear from the discussion over the past few weeks from certain organizations and agencies in particular that there was a sense of fear and hesitance and a lack of confidence in the Commission. And I've been working on cannabis my whole life, and I have to recognize that other people have been working on other things, and this is new to them. And so I'm trying to have some empathy and compassion for that, because there are plenty of things that I am not informed on because I've been working on cannabis. So there's nothing wrong with that, and I think it's part of our Commission's job to put that information out there. We haven't had the time or the resources to create partnerships with some of these agencies and organizations where there is trust there. I think that is absolutely within our control, and something we can do, especially now that we have more staff and more time. In those first few months in particular, we were so busy researching and writing, and very importantly, gaining that trust with each other. And I am so proud of the independence of this Commission and the way that we approached the first round, that with our different public health, public safety, regulatory, business, social justice expertise, that we were able to mostly come to an agreement and be a team. And that was our first priority, and I think that was exactly right. So, especially now that we have initial staff, we will soon have staff focused specifically on outreach and constituent services and government affairs. I am in favor of taking the time to build that trust outwardly now and watch the process unfold. We can collect data, very importantly. We can create new relationships, nurture our existing relationships, do trainings, and build our agency in line with our mission statement and demonstrate how we're doing so. I'm in favor of using that time to address the concerns that have been raised that are very valid by using our own outreach and public communication. That brings me to caveat number 1, which is that I would ask, if we choose to delay certain areas of implementation, that we now make a commitment, and I don't know if it has to be a vote, probably not, but just a commitment among the 5 of us, that we will base these decisions, when we get to them after the delay, on facts. In particular, looking at our mission statement, as a group, I think we should reaffirm our existing commitment that we made to define and publicly measure our performance. Further commit to the decision we made to make decisions based on existing data. And if we delay once, which I see as a gesture of good faith, then I would ask that as soon as our director of research comes on in the next few weeks, that we have a serious, open conversation about our commitment and our obligation to evaluate the effectiveness of the decisions we make, the consequences of the program, and our existing commitment and our mission statement to conduct and contribute on research to marijuana topics, so that we would be using our own data when we make these decisions. During our public listening periods, we will encourage everyone to continue to give us
Need I
feedback.
say everybody put their phone on silent, please? Go ahead, I'm sorry, Commissioner Tyler.
And while people are giving us feedback, they can certainly opine on the speed at which the program is going relative to their own subjective sense of how fast or slow the program is going or what the priorities should be. And that feedback will continue to be welcome. But when ultimately it comes time for us to make the decisions, it has to be based on evidence. And when we're talking about social consumption and delivery in particular, let's not forget social consumption is in California and Colorado. It's being implemented in Nevada and Alaska. It's allowed for under the law in Maine. Delivery is happening in Massachusetts in the medical program. It's happening in California, Nevada, Oregon under adult use, additionally for medical in other states. So I can support a one-time delay if we can all agree that when we reevaluate, we will use real data to make these decisions.
Thank you, Commissioner Tyler.
May I go on to caveat number 2?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was...
That was number 1.
That was number 1. No, fine. Can I just ask, please, for silence and side conversations? Thank you very much. Go ahead, Commissioner Tyler.
Okay, so all that said, I support a delay. However, the major problem with delaying these licenses is the effect that it will have on the opportunity for equitable participation in this industry. I sincerely believe that no one who called for a delay or supported a delay was trying to deliberately suppress the opportunities for people disproportionately harmed by the drug war, or to direct people from marginalized communities to be evicted or fined or arrested, but that is the consequences that will happen with this delay if we don't intentionally address that. And that is how institutional racism happens, that you forget about the effects on certain populations and you encourage the status quo, and we would be violating our clear instructions to promote the inclusion of people from disproportionately harmed communities if we were to delay these licenses and leave those populations behind yet again. Therefore, I propose the only way to allow this delay and to honor our commitment to all participants in this industry, and particularly the smaller participants, is to control the market opportunities so that they don't get ignored and left behind yet again. Specifically, if we delay the issuance of certain licenses, social consumption, and delivery in general, during the delay, we must not allow any licensed social consumption or delivery activity. So I support Commissioner Doyle in that if we put off delivery only, we should also put off delivery for existing retail. And this would prevent us from creating further market advantages for those who already have significant market advantages. Secondly, when we do adopt regulations and open applications for those licenses for a certain period of time, and I would suggest 5 years, those initial delivery licenses would only go to our equity applicants. Micro businesses and co-ops would be allowed to deliver. But for that period, we would control the market opportunities so that, again, those were the only recipients to be able to deliver. Equity applicants, micro businesses, and co-ops. Those initial social consumption licenses would only go to equity applicants. And then after this designated time period, we would open those licenses to a broader group. There are 3 side benefits to this delay based on the public feedback that we heard. Number 1, if we do put off delivery, we would be reserving delivery in the meantime for patients. Because the patient delivery program would continue, and that means that delivery would be only permitted to patients, many of whom have limited mobility and should be receiving priority for delivery. Number 2, we talked a lot about encouraging the partnership of the big guys and the little guys, and if we should do mentoring or incubation or what type of partnering we could do where we weren't forcing anybody to do anything. This addresses that because when we do open the delivery licenses, if an establishment wants to deliver and no one is forcing them to, they would then partner with an equity applicant that holds a delivery license. And we would have this delay that we're making now to address all of the operational concerns that come with that. Lastly, the current equity program is totally workable, and I think we should move forward with it as designed. But when we did talk about our disproportionately impacted communities, we acknowledged it was done in a rush, and we made a decision to be more objective and transparent. And if we have more time, we can then refine our data to more accurately designate the populations we are trying to serve. We could also create partnerships with sources of capital that wish to provide investment or loans to entrepreneurs from disproportionately harmed communities. We can finely tune our technical assistance program so that there are specific options for participants who wish to pursue delivery-only or social consumption licenses. And we are already on track with the timeline that I would suggest we stick with, which we voted in December, to refer the issue of delivery only to issue recommendations by October 31st, and then to consider, evaluate, and adopt draft regulations within 3 months, which is also the timeline that we set for smoking. So with that timeline already being in place, I would recommend that we reconsider delivery and social consumption at that time, with all of these priorities in the meantime to address the different concerns. And that's my quote.
Please. Thank you. The bad part about going last is sometimes someone has spoken so eloquently that you've got nothing to add to it. So I don't have anything to add to what Commissioner Title just said. I completely agree with everything she just said, and I strongly support going forward the way that you articulated. So thank you very much for that. Other comments? I'm proposing that we adopt the recommendation that the Commissioner. Yeah, of course.
So, could you speak in further detail about if we revisit this in October, and what are we committing ourselves to at that point in time? And the reason I ask that is because I think that there is a way forward on this. I'm not sure that October is going to be when we're ready either, and that's purely based on sort of what we have in terms of capacity, and also what we have, in who's entered the market at that point, how many entities we have to sort of test and figure out, is this working, could this work? I want to make sure that we're striking that right balance of having, as you pointed out, enough data and information, and not have this be something where it comes to October and we say, oh, we're not ready now either. I don't want to give I don't want to give false hope or make promises that we can't keep. I'm not interested in making promises that I can't keep. So I want for there to be this understanding that we need to get information in, and I have said this as I have met with people over the last several months, that give me that information. I am wide open to that information, but I don't know in October that I'm going to be able to say at that point in time, and I don't want it to be something where I'm going, oh, I can't do it in October either. People, look at us and go, oh, they're never going to do it.
Can I address this one? Commissioner General? Thanks. I believe we should keep the October date. I believe that we can in October say, yeah, we're not ready to make a decision, so that's not, we're not forcing ourselves to do anything. But I believe we should keep the October date. We should make a good faith commitment to do everything we can and need to do to be in a position to make that decision, realizing that it's an imperfect world and we might not be able to do that. But I'd rather work really hard towards that deadline and fail if we can't do it. But give ourselves that deadline and make a good faith commitment to make that deadline, because I am very concerned about deferring this. I agree with Commissioner Title that deferring is the right thing to do at this point in time, but I'd like to keep that to a relatively short timeline. I'd like to put some pressure, frankly, on us as a commission.
We don't have enough pressure on ourselves.
Additional pressure. No, good point. But I'd like, on this particular topic, I'd like to keep the pressure on, realizing that we can in October say we're not ready yet, but I'd rather say, what do we need to know to get ready? Have that explicit conversation, put together a work plan, make sure that work plan is resourced appropriately, and do everything we possibly can to get it done. And it's just me speaking, I'm convinced we can. If we very early on say, what do we need to know? Where are we going to get that information from to make this decision and work towards that time frame, which I admit is an aggressive time frame. I very strongly believe that we should hold to that time frame. Again, realizing that we might at that point not be ready, but I don't want to accept that as a likelihood right now. I'd rather say let's try to do it. Go ahead.
Can I ask one question? First, I want to thank Commissioner Doyle. I think that, it's, having worked in the industry forever, it must be tough to see us talking about delaying and rolling out different things when you've had the experience of all these different states and we don't have that. Having said that, a lot of your comments surrounded data, and my question, and not to disagree with the chairman, but do we have enough time to collect that data? Is that enough time for our researcher to come in and collect whatever we're looking for, given the fact that I think our hands are tied with some of the data we can collect by the statute? Because if we are going to make these decisions based upon data, I just want to make sure that we have enough time so that, again, we don't end up in a situation like Commissioner McBride had said, is that we come back in October and say, listen, we don't have the data, and so we don't make the decisions. I mean, I think that, again, this industry is going to be here. The longevity we hope is there. But I think in the initial startups, if we're going to rely on data, I wish we had our researcher here, who's not hired yet, to say, is that enough time? Or do you think we can get that amount of data in that time? I guess.
I have a lot of trust in this commission and the staff. We almost, just the 6 of us, put together a 108-page regulation draft right by December. And I think if we do that,
Wish all these times to go pulled apart.
What's that?
Which got ripped apart by everybody. Which got ripped apart.
That's pretty good. I continue to be proud of it. Between February and October, we can collect data from Massachusetts and all the other states that we made enough to revisit this.
Okay.
I also think that it's important that we actually get way more specific than data. I mean, what is it that we need to know? Some of it will be data, some of it will be actually enhancing some of our operating requirements. So I think it's real important that we have the conversation very quickly. What is it that we need to know so that each of us are comfortable weighing in and voting on this matter? Because I personally don't know that we've had, at least in my mind, that conversation explicitly. What is it that we need to know? At that point, I think it's quite possible that Commissioner Flanagan is right, that some of the stuff that we need to know is going to require more time than it takes. But until we have that conversation about what explicitly we need to know and how we're going to get to that data, I think I'm hard pressed to say that October's too soon. So I'd rather put it in October, force the conversation, if you will, about what we need to do and how we're going to get that data to make this decision in an informed manner. And shoot for that, just like everything else, if we need to change that, we need to change that, but I'd like to make a good faith commitment to work through that time frame unless we find out that's impossible because of some of the data requirements. But I think we need to define what we need, explicitly what we need to know that we don't know right now that prevents us from today making that decision, this decision. Go ahead.
I agree. I think step 1 is the 5 of us make a list of what are our concerns here that are preventing us from voting today.
Right.
What is the data that we would like to collect?
Right.
And we approach it the same way we did every other decision, because there is no decision on which we had adequate data. If we're looking for, we look at the data that we already have. And again, I know it's been reported a lot that we would be the first state to be doing those things, but that is absolutely not true.
Certainly not for delivery.
So can I just make one clarification? I'm supportive of having this conversation in October, given the fact that we're having the conversation and it's not misinterpreted, is that's the time it's definitely rolling out, but it's the time that we have the conversation. Because I think what's going to happen is we say the word October and everybody's going to come back and say, well, they promised in October they're going to come back and do this. I just want to make sure that we're going to have a conversation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're beholden to that's when the program is going to roll out.
But that was not your proposal. The proposal was to vote in October with a substitute.
My proposal was to stick with the existing timeline that we've already set for these other subjects, which is that we close information gathering October 31st, and then we spend the next 3 months discussing and evaluating and making a decision. And if I didn't trust this commission as much as I do, I would be pushing for a lot more, like, let's do this on this day, blah, blah. But frankly, I just do trust this commission to take that with good faith.
So I think that this is something that we really need to revisit quickly. If we decide to defer per Commissioner Title's recommendation, I think at a very early public commission meeting, we need to come back based upon the suggestion you just made, Commissioner Title, with a work plan, having talked to each of the commissioners, understood exactly what each of the commissioners needs to see and understand. I'm sorry, this is a little bit. You want to change seats with me?
No.
Or
Feel free.
You don't mind looking at my back?
Yep.
I understand what each of the commissioners needs to see, put together a work plan, resource that work plan, and agree to that work plan with the timeline of trying to get to the October timeline to discuss and debate this. So I think that I probably don't think we can do it this week, given everything else on our plate, but shortly thereafter, this next week, the following week, I'm going to ask the executive director, with input from each of the commissioners, to come up with a work plan to address this in the time frame that is based upon the specific informational requirements from each of the commissioners. So, if that's okay, I'm willing to put this for a vote. Unless
One more question.
Go ahead.
So, can you give a little bit more detail about? I agree with the approach of trying to make, when we do move ahead, in the event that we do move ahead with these licenses and when that happens, of making these licenses available to our economic empowerment applicants, and allowing for there to be a process in place there. Have you looked at the idea of holding it open for 5 years? Have you looked at all about whether there have been challenges and sort of similar programs? I'm thinking purely like as a lawyer and like the legal challenges piece of it, to make sure that we are thinking far ahead and sort of trying to insulate that, ourselves as much as possible in, anything that we decide to move ahead with. And obviously, the general counsel would be helpful on this. And so I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but have you looked at that, or is it something that we can look at?
So I think we were very careful in the way that we crafted both the economic empowerment and the equity program. And we got a lot of flack for it, actually. We all did collectively, in that it was race neutral, it was objective, it was transparent. I think I would defer to the general counsel to look at it during the delay to ensure that it would work for the 5-year period as well. But I think we were very careful in the way we crafted it, so that we were very much in line with the statute and with the requirement that we're looking at communities that were objectively disproportionately harmed.
I guess I'm just talking about keeping it open for a 5-year period. If per your suggestion, if we're going to move ahead, and the idea would be to keep those licenses limited to our equity stakeholders and keep it open for the period of 5 years. And this may be something that we need to look at, but just making sure that we are careful as we're kind of going down that path and providing ourselves with what we need to back up any legal issues that we might see.
That's appropriate.
Okay, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, my understanding is the vote would be on the elimination of delivery, and that would be reflected in the regulations. Would there be any placeholder language in that section of Commissioner Title, or would we be putting that off for now? My advice would be that we do not include language in the regulations, because as I understand it, part of this process would be an opportunity to gain more knowledge and familiarity. So I think at the end of the day, we could draft regulations that were smarter down the line. But that's just a question I need to clarify.
This is a package deal. I support the delay if we are very clear about this other action that we are taking with regard to the market.
But the question is, and I agree with that completely. The question, I think, that is, do we need to embody Part 2 in the regulations, or is it good enough that we have a vote and record that vote and operate in good faith based upon that vote?
What is the disadvantage to including it in the
Well,
regulation?
my understanding, based on the discussion that's been had today and the comments that we've received, is that there's a period of time we could take to learn more about this, how delivery would work. So I think that you could, at the end of the day, build better regulations, smarter regulations, if you don't memorialize them right now. In other words, I don't see any advantage to putting them in right now. I see a lot of disadvantages in terms of trying to undo what we put in.
You're talking about specifically the requirements and operational requirements around delivery and social consumption, taking those out?
So all across the regulations, taking out references to delivery would be my recommendation.
But then we would include that we're delaying with the timeline, and then after that, opening to equity applicants.
I don't think that has to be in the regulations.
What do we do with smoking? Did we put that in the regulations or
It's
not?
not referenced.
Yeah, to me, I think it's the same as smoking, which is we, as commission, explicitly agreed on something, voted on it, and I view that as an absolute commitment. I'm not sure agreeing to visit a matter 6 months down the road is a regulation as much as it's a good faith commitment on the part of the commission. So I'm not sure it fits in the regulations, but Commissioner Fennell.
But what about the period in which the licenses would be initially offered to those 3 groups? I think that should be in the regulation.
Again, I think, that the commission can take a vote to consider that and address it down the line. But you may see that differently and want that to be put up to a vote. I don't see an enormous amount of advantage to putting it into the regulations at this time when we don't have complete information as to how that would work. And we're going to conduct, and the commission has made a commitment, I believe, to conducting some research as far as that's concerned.
I do think the commission needs to vote. I want the commission to vote so that it is part of the permanent record that we voted on these set of commitments that we're talking about right now. I'm not sure, I think I'm agreeing with the general counsel that I'm not sure I see them in the regulations that we are going to finalize and approve next week. But I do absolutely want to vote, and I absolutely want the commission to, in the public record, have made this commitment. That's my opinion.
Can I actually ask, Commissioner Title, could you read the part of your proposal again regarding the 5 years and the groups? Just, it's difficult to take in, just listening, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, I'm a visual learner myself. Okay, so first we would take out all of the requirements around social consumption and delivery. Right, so we would make it clear that during the delay, we're not allowing any licensed social consumption or delivery to take place, except for medical, which is of course not covered. When we adopt regulations and open applications for those licenses for 5 years, those initial delivery licenses would only go to equity applicants, micro businesses, and co-ops. Those initial social consumption licenses would only go to equity applicants. And after that time period, we would open those licenses to a broader group. Okay, so tell me what the problem is with including that in the regulations.
Well, it's just my advice is that if we put it into the regulations, then we're trying to change that or potentially undo that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a commission decision as to whether you have enough information at this point in time to include it in the regulations. It's a policy decision. So I would suggest that you separate these votes. I think the votes should be separated. You could vote first as to whether to eliminate references to delivery and social consumption. And then you could vote second as to whether to have some language in the regulations that puts in this period. In other words, you do not have to consider them together.
I would like to suggest that first I'd like
to have the commission vote on a policy, and then we can get into, how we're gonna handle that from a regulation standpoint. But to me, the first order of business is Commissioner Title's proposal, which I personally endorse. I'd like to vote on that proposal, and then we can talk about how best to make that a reality in terms of whether embedding it into the regulations or just leaving it as a public vote on the commission's part. So I guess I'd like to ask, are there any concerns or further comments or questions that people have before we vote on Commissioner Title's proposal? Go ahead.
Me?
Commissioner
Sorry.
Doyle. No, don't be sorry. Of course not.
Don't need to hold up the works. So the concern, I have two concerns that are actually related, but the 5 years seems like a long period of time, and I think the thing that is making me concerned about it is the inclusion of it with regard to the social consumption and limiting that to the equity applicants, because I think there are some co-ops that during either the initial or the second listening period, I heard either orally or in writing, and I'm sorry, I just can't remember which it was. Some of them were talking about wanting to have an opportunity to do sort of agritourism, where you would go out and they would have, their crop. They would have the it's essentially a place. It's sort of like a
Tasting room at a vineyard?
I know it's
Tasting room.
I
Winery.
keep,
Yeah, tasting room
I
at a
keep
vineyard,
calling
right?
it the Napa Valley of marijuana or cannabis, and it's.
I think you should refer to the Pioneer Valley.
The pipe. So that was the one that seems like a long. I know 5 years isn't in the grand scheme of things a long period of time, but I was just concerned that it might not be consistent with our mission to help farmers. So that was the one concern that I had.
I would take that as a something I would support. If we can find a way to define that type of sort of farm stand on-site consumption at a farm. That's what you're describing?
Yeah.
Or a tasting room at a vineyard, something like that.
Yeah. And I don't know if we should limit it to the co-ops or cultivators in general. I'm genuinely unsure of how to approach that. But
So I would be open to discussing a different time frame, or even just putting in the regulations as a certain period and then discussing that as a group. The reason that I came up with 5 years is that I was envisioning the goal, which would be to have an equity applicant start a delivery-only license and then establish a customer base, business practices, opportunities for compliance, learning, and then raise the money to be able to get another license. And I pictured 5 years as the right time frame, but I'm open to others, considering other factors.
I think I'm perfectly happy with what Commissioner Doyle just said. With respect to adding co-ops into the social consumption licenses that you're talking about, I think 5 years is right. I actually agree with you. I feel like we are doing a disservice. I agree with the recommendation that you made, but I feel like we're doing a disservice to our objective of ensuring that disproportionately impacted communities are local business to this business. And I think that, I don't think 5 years is compensating for that, but I think 5 years is appropriate. So I support the time frame. Are there, I'm still not sure that there are other comments on the policy before we start talking about.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I don't know if I should know this or not, but so the tasting room, what have you, that you envision, Commissioner Doyle or whatever, is that legislative or can we do that under the regs?
well, so it's social
consumption, isn't it?
So I think it's contemplated in the legislation. So, and I've said this publicly, so I'll just say it again. In my opinion, ballot, needs to be done first. So it's going to depend if a farm is in.
Well, we're going to come back to the municipality question in a
yeah.
little bit. So,
But yes, on-site consumption is explicitly authorized under statute.
But it's a separate license, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner McBride? Okay.
I will say I'm
Yes,
more
please.
comfortable. I'm more comfortable with it being per Commissioner Title's suggestion, that it be sort of a, a date certain as opposed to pinning a number on it at this point in time. And it's really just because I want to do the legal research to make sure that like I'm clear on any legal implications that it could have for us with regard to challenges. So I just want to make sure.
Can I just push back on that a little bit? Because I actually think 5 years is important, but can't we do 5 years with a caveat that we'll do the legal research and make sure that it's actually doesn't create legal problems for ourselves? Like I understand the need to have the caveat that you just articulated. I'd rather have us commit to that as our intent. Maybe we have to back off on it because of legal issues, which is fine. But I'd rather commit, and this is personal, this is my personal opinion, I'd rather commit to that intent unless we can't do it, rather than say it's open-ended. I think it's important.
Since we're doing 2 separate votes, my suggestion would be that we vote with 5 years, but then we don't put the term 5 years into the regulation, so that if there was a reason to change the number of years, then we would just need to take another vote. Is that right?
What do we have to do? The resolutions?
Okay, let's I'm proposing, and I hope this is okay with everybody, I am proposing that we vote on the policy that Commissioner Title has proposed, and then we subsequently have, I think, 2 separate conversations about the regulations that we are going to finalize by March 15th. First being, do we take out, as our general counsel suggested, take out all references to delivery and social consumption in those regulations. So that's a second vote. The third vote is, do we actually go beyond the public vote of the commission and the commitment of the public vote of the commission to support Commissioner Title's recommendation? Do we actually put language in the regulations that will be promulgated on March 15th around this regulation? So those are, to me, 3 separate votes. Let me try it again, because I'm getting some confusion. I believe that it is imperative for the commission as a group to vote on, as a policy, the recommendations of Commissioner Title. And so I'm suggesting that's the first vote. The second vote, which was suggested by by our general counsel, is if we agree on that policy, is it appropriate to remove all references to delivery and social consumption from the regulations that we will promulgate by the 15th of March? So that's pretty straightforward, yes or no, but I think that's second. The third is, I don't think we're yet aligned about whether just voting on the policy is sufficient or whether we need to put words around the policy into our final regulations that are being promulgated on the 15th. So that would be the third vote. Does that make sense? Okay. So unless there are further questions, I'd like to put the policy that Commissioner Title articulated up for a vote unless there are further questions on the policy.
Can you just help me understand the difference between taking a vote on a policy matter versus something being written into the regulations? So,
well, as I understand it, as a policy, the commission had decided in the draft regulations to include a delivery option and a social consumption option. So I actually would recommend that there's a vote on that first. In other words, whether or not that gets eliminated. I would do a second vote along the lines of whether or not it's necessary for the commission to memorialize its commitment to studying delivery and social consumption by a certain date would be the next vote to take place. My recommendation would be that you not put in a specific date, either duration date in terms of how long these licenses are, or any other certain dates until you have more information, and wait to basically issue regulations on that issue when you have more information. I'm not sure, you would have to, in terms of the chair suggested voting on your policy, you would have to articulate what portions of the policy people are voting on if that's the first vote. But you could move instead immediately to a vote of whether or not delivery and social consumption needs to be eliminated from the reg.
all due respect, we have to figure this out in terms of what we're doing. I don't believe it is appropriate to vote on removing delivery and social consumption from the regs until and unless we have an agreement with the commission about what we are going to do in terms of the deferral. So I just want to reverse the
Sure.
I think you're right in terms of the things, but I'd like to try to reverse the sequence, and I'm not quite sure. Maybe we should take a short break since we're talking anyway. I'd like to have language with respect to the policy that Commissioner Title proposed that we can use for a commission vote on the policy, and then we can come and deal with the regulation issues. So is that something that we can do, which is work on that during a short break, and then come back and discuss it further if necessary, and then vote on it? Does that work for everybody?
Yep.
So it's 20 of 12. I'm going to propose a break till noon. Thank you very much. We're going to take up the issue that we were just talking about, but before we do, I'm going to just offer my personal opinion on something because I feel it's important. This is, again, my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the commission here. I truly respect everybody's opinion, particularly those that expressed a desire to study this issue more, to get more facts before making a decision. I completely respect that, and it appears, although we have to vote on it, that we'll behave in that manner and respond to that in terms of our actions. I want to say, and this is again purely personal, I reject the argument that we can't do it in time. I have an enormous confidence in this commission. I have enormous confidence in the executive director. I have enormous confidence in the team that the executive director is in the process of building around himself. I am completely confident that had this decision gone differently and that we voted to allow delivery and social consumption starting accepting applications for licenses on April 1st, I am totally confident in the commission's ability to process those license applications and to regulate the business once those license applications were accepted. So I'm agreeing to the deferral, but I want to just make it clear that my reason for agreeing to the deferral is to respect the desire of people to get more facts on the table and more study on the table. I will also say that I believe it is imperative that we are very explicit, again I'm speaking personally, that we are very explicit about what those facts are. We have managed in this state and in other states to deal with some of these concerns with respect to alcohol, to deal with the ability to make sure that alcohol delivery services work, that people that are over 21 only are able to get delivery from alcohol, that we can deal with some of the social consumption issues with respect to driving while under the influence. So I do believe that we need to study those issues more, but I also believe that if we solve them for alcohol, we can solve them for marijuana or cannabis, whichever term I'm supposed to use. So that's just my personal opinion, but the first part is most important, which is, you know, I think this commission is great. I think the governor, attorney general, and treasurer did a phenomenal job in putting the commission together. I think we picked a great executive director. I think he's done a great job of staffing, and I have a lot of confidence in this commission, so that whenever we do decide to allow for these businesses, we will be certainly able to regulate them, and we would have been by April 1st, in my opinion. So thank you for indulging me. Where we left it is that we are going to have two votes. The first is we are going to vote on the policy as articulated by Commissioner Title. Commissioner Title and our general counsel spent the break working on the language for that policy. I'm going to ask our general counsel to read what we propose to vote on, allow for any comments or questions, and then have a vote on that, and then we will have a subsequent conversation and vote on changes to the draft regulations that are engendered by the vote we just took on the policy perspective. So, Christine?
As I understand it, Commissioner Title is proposing that we postpone delivery and social consumption, that within 2 weeks the commission comes up with an action plan which will include gathering concerns from the commissioners on the issue issues concerning delivery and social consumption. That action plan would be revisited in October, hopefully with input from our research person and also our community outreach person. It would include considerations of the operational requirements for these kinds of businesses, the kinds of partnerships that would have to be developed. We would also, the commission would also commit to drafting or adopting regulations by January on the exclusivity concept. As Commissioner Title has suggested, social consumption, there would be an opportunity for exclusivity in terms of equity applicants, and as Commissioner Doyle suggested, farms. In terms of delivery, there would be exclusivity opportunities for equity applicants, micro businesses, and co-ops. But again, we would not put anything specific in the regs right now. But the commission would commit to having draft regulations by January. The second vote would be on the actual regulations.
Let's leave that for the time being. So I have a couple comments on that, and then like other comments before we take a vote. So one comment on this is that these will be draft regulations that we were talking about. So we will go through the same regulatory process that we have up to this point. So we will develop draft regulations. We will allow for public comment. So it's not going to be something that we do anything other than the completely transparent and open way we've done all of our regulations. So I don't want anybody to think that we're going to make final decisions in October without giving the public a chance to comment on the draft regulations. So I think that's important to note. Two is I commit to working with the executive director so that sometime in the next 2 weeks, maybe sooner, we will have an action plan that we will review with with the commission and vote on and start executing on. The third thing I'll say is that we are legislatively required to assume responsibility for the medical marijuana program from the Department of Public Health no later than December 31st of this year, and will ensure that whatever regulations we develop with respect to social consumption and delivery are part of the process of working on integrating our regulations with the Department of Public Health based upon the timeline that is in the process of being developed. Well, not as we'll make sure that we don't do anything that's contradictory.
Okay, yeah, I don't know that works out timing-wise, because the medical program will have to be integrated with us December 31st.
We'll be cognizant. We'll be cognizant of whatever conflicts and trying to avoid those.
Well, I think we can be aware of, the idea would be to try to put some draft regulations together by January. We're aware of the tensions with the medical program. Would the Commissioner Doyle's concerns be more adequately addressed if we put that off to February, gave ourselves another?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically opening up the regs twice in a short period of time, which has costs associated with it, but they're not tremendous. But I just want to make sure people are aware of the timing issues there, because the regulations to integrate the medical program are going to have to be published and all that before the program comes to us.
Yeah, we understand that.
Okay.
And we have not, obviously the commission has not made any decision as to either the timing of that, or how basically the repeal, how the department will repeal their regulations and we will adopt them. But if another month would allay your concerns.
I would recommend that for sheer bandwidth and making sure that appropriate attention is given to all the different things that we have on our plate. That's a lot.
Yeah, well, we are in the process of figuring out the timeline with the Department of Health. Both Christine and Sean are working to try to develop a recommended timeline for recommendation and approval by the Commission. So we'll just figure it out and deal with the issues. I think it's premature to kind of figure out exactly what the timeline looks like until we have some input from Sean and Christine with respect to the timeline for medical marijuana transition. Sorry for that little detour. So based upon what Christine just read out, can I have any questions or comments, or are people comfortable with that language? And I'm viewing that as commitment, a good faith public commitment of the commission, collectively and individually. So are there any concerns about having a vote on that?
I have a question. Is what we're voting on committing to the 5 years? Because I would
No.
like more information on that.
No, I think, as I understand it, and Commissioner Title can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the commission in general is agreeing that there will be some concept of exclusivity as to certain license types. And that there will be draft regulations that will go through obviously the commission deliberation process and the public hearing process and all of that. So there's no, as I understand it, no commitment to any kind of duration as to exclusivity on the table for this particular policy vote.
If fellow commissioners are not comfortable coming up with any specific time period, I'm fine with that. My preference would be for us to, since this is not going in regulations, to agree on a time period. If not, that's fine. As far as concept, it's not some concept of exclusivity, it's exclusivity is the way I would describe it.
Yeah.
But other than that, that sounds fine.
Yeah, my opinion, I think I expressed before the break, is I think we should put 5 years into this as a policy with the appropriate caveats that we will study the issue legally. But I'd like to start with that and back off on it as necessary, as opposed to either put a shorter time frame in or being non-specific. With respect to time frame, that's my opinion. I thought we talked about that. At least I thought I expressed that opinion before the break. It's my opinion. But I'm perfectly happy putting in whatever language people feel comfortable with respect to the caveats about getting legal advice and legal opinion on the subject.
Mr. Chair.
Let me just get that. Can I get thoughts from other commissioners on that, please?
I completely understand the desire to move forward with exclusivity. I will acknowledge that as a risk-averse attorney, I am very nervous about potential challenges and litigation that this could give rise
even in form of policy,
to.
not regulations?
Well, this is the thing, is that I guess it's about sort of how we phrase this is going to are creating a record, and how we phrase it is really important. And I honestly, it's really very wonky of me, but that's my concern, and that's really sort of the hiccup.
I never heard the word wonky until last week, and now I've heard it like 15 times. So I respect that completely.
So I mean, I guess if we can, is there a way to figure out, and maybe this is what the conversation was, but how to memorialize this as a concept while giving ourselves the time to really figure out kind of the implications of it. It's really, it's hard, it's very difficult to kind of talk about this in like real time without sort of being able to like turn it over in my head for a little while. But I guess that's my hang up.
I understand.
Why don't we just call it exclusivity and not specify a time period, and then come back to that during our action plan discussion
During our action plan discussion?
within the next 2 weeks?
So I'm a little nervous about, I mean, for non-wonky reasons, I'm a little nervous about not specifying something, because I feel that it's going to be easy to back off on something or end up with something different. I guess the biggest concern I have is that we'll end up with something different than at least what my intention is today. Not for legal reasons, I'm perfectly happy if that's the outcome, but I feel very strongly that that's the right answer if it's not legally impossible or legally problematic.
But I guess my answer to that, and my response to that, is that it's not legal. This goes back to what I said before, which is I am not in the business of making promises and guarantees that I can't keep. And so if I don't want to be in a position where we've committed to something that then we've made a lot of, in our, our regulations and we have, for good reason, given ourselves, some dates. I want to make sure that we're not committing to something that then we're immediately going to be backing off of.
Other commissioners?
I'm fine with not setting a time certain, like how many years, and we talk about it later. Because again, if we don't know the legal implications of this, and it gives us a little bit of time. I mean, we've said here multiple times that our intent is to address this. The votes are going to prove that we're going to address this. We've made public commitments that we're going to address this. I don't think that anyone can come back and say that we're going to just walk away from it.
Commissioner Bill?
I'm thinking.
Okay. I didn't see the smoke coming in your ears, that's why I didn't know.
It's impressive. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say anything.
Okay.
I'm still thinking.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Tyler, you said you were going to go without a time certain on this?
Let's give ourselves the time period, the same time period for which we come up to with the action plan, which is the next 2 weeks, to look into whether there are any problems with the 5-year time period. I don't believe that there are, but I'm fine with leaving some time to investigate that.
If I could.
Yes, please.
The only thing I would say is that the commission is going to be very busy between now and at least when final regulations are in.
I would extend that time frame for another couple of years, but go ahead anyway.
So I would just add that consideration.
Yeah, I guess my concern with what you just said, Commissioner Title, and agreeing with Christine, I don't think 2 weeks is going to be enough to assuage the legal concerns on this. So I'm not sure that in 2 weeks we're going to be in any different shape than we are right now, which is not sure that 5 years is legally not problematic. I'm sorry for all the negatives. So I would much prefer, and I've said this, I'm sorry for repeating myself, I would much prefer to say 5 years subject to legal approval, and shorter if we have to, rather than just say we'll figure it out sometime. Because I don't think in 2 weeks we're going to know any more than we know now on the legal issues, in my opinion. Is that it? Or at least not with certainty.
That's fine. Okay, so we can come back to that in the same time period during which we investigate everything else through October.
So through October, we put nothing in right now in terms of time frame, and put that.
Unspecified time period. I'm actually quite familiar with this area of law. I know the majority of us are attorneys, but I think I've probably worked on cannabis law the
Okay.
longest, and I don't see a problem with the 5 years, so I don't
Yeah, I'm
anticipate it,
uncomfortable.
but we can give it until October.
Okay. I think I'm outvoted on this one, so I'll remove my concern. So we will not put a time frame in for this exclusivity. We will take out kind of exclusive and say exclusive, so no caveats about exclusivity. But with that, are we ready to have a vote on this policy?
Could we read back what exactly the motion is?
Sure.
Because with all the
Yeah,
discussion.
Sure.
As I understand Commissioner Title's proposal is that we would eliminate references to delivery and social consumption, except to put an explicit prohibition for now on those two activities. The commission would commit to developing an action plan within 2 weeks that would address a compilation of the commissioner's concerns. That action plan would be revisited in October. So among the things that would be addressed in October are the scope of the exclusivity, any kind of research that the commission either has been able to do or plans to do, operational requirements, potential partnerships with entities that would have an interest in the delivery and social consumption. And that's all I have. And just to address Commissioners Doyle's, I think, correct concern is that we would have draft regulations not by January, but rather by February, in order to adequately give us enough time to consider the implications for the medical marijuana piece.
In that motion, I didn't hear the discussion about drafting the regulations.
And so the draft regulations would be.
What are we committing to
put
do?
before the commission in February.
To do, yeah, but are we committing, so what I'm trying to get out is, what are we committing to today with regard to this? Are we committing to, drafting regulations that we are committing today will be something? Or are we saying we're gonna study the issue and draft regulations
As
based
I
on
un-
further discussion? That's where I'm lost.
Yeah, as I understand it, there's an action plan developed in the next 2 weeks or so, revisited in October, continue to be commission discussions, that with the goal of coming up with some decision-making around exclusivity.
Okay, so it's folded
and how
into
it
the
attaches to, so we're not making any, as I understand, the commission is not making any commitment to tying exclusivity to certain license types or for a certain period of time. We're just committing the commission to having that discussion and coming up with some draft regulations that are subject to the normal processes in terms of being, subject to public comment in February.
Okay, great. No, I couldn't, for whatever reason, I was not getting that this had been folded into the action plan on the other issues. Okay. Great.
To clarify, but the motion does include the specific groups with exclusivity tied to the specific license types, right?
Well, my understanding from a comment that the chair said is that that there wasn't any tying of exclusivity to specific license types, but that's a policy decision for.
I'm not sure I'm following that, I apologize.
Okay.
What did I
That,
say?
in other words, that Commissioner Title had proposed that there was exclusivity for certain license types and
Yes.
certain activities.
Yes.
So I think that's on the table as to whether the other commissioners agree with that, and that's a policy decision.
But what did I say that you?
I thought you had indicated that there wasn't going to be a sort of an agreement as part of this vote as far as that's concerned. But if you didn't, I apologize.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit
Okay.
confused, I apologize
So
for that.
Commissioner Title had proposed that there would be exclusivity
Mhm.
for social consumption, those kinds of licenses would only be held by equity applicants and farms. For delivery, there would be exclusivity for equity applicants, micro businesses, and co-ops.
Right.
So
I guess
think
I'm
it
lost,
needs-
because I completely agree with that.
Okay.
So I'm lost.
So I think it just needs to be clear that the other commissioners have to have an opportunity to
Yep.
address that.
I agree with that, but I just didn't, I support those recommendations.
So what I was not clear on is whether we are committing to those parameters today, or if we are going to, which I thought was, what was just said was, we were going to take the idea, fold it into the action plan, and study it, and come with draft, responding to the idea, by the end of February, come up with draft regulations. Because I do want to study more what the implications will be of limiting the licenses that way, and whether the time period is appropriate. I don't have enough information here with me today to affirmatively vote for that. So I just want to understand it better. So that's why I was asking, are we committing to do these specific things today? Or are we committing to study them and then come up with draft regulations on this issue by February? I just wasn't understanding what we were voting on.
The motion on the table is to commit to delay those particular licenses, to commit to exclusivity for those particular groups, and in the meantime, during the delay, to do those items on the action plan in terms of research and addressing the concerns.
Just having, I apologize if I'm.
No, this is very important to get right, so
Right,
don't
no.
apologize, please. Oh, hold on. Go ahead.
I may be being thick. None of us have probably slept as we normally should during the recent time period. Where I'm sort of struggling with it is we're committing to something and then studying it. Do you see what I'm just, do you see what I mean?
We are studying the concerns that are leading us to delay social consumption and delivery. That was the entire purpose of the delay,
Right.
without the equity piece of it.
Yeah.
So that is the action plan, is to ensure that we address those concerns during the delay.
Okay.
That's the purpose of that section.
But I think this is important, because we are agreeing to this delay, and because I am personally concerned about the impact that delay has on our ability to meet the social justice and economic empowerment and impact on disproportionately impacted communities. Because we are delaying, and I'm concerned about that, we are also agreeing that if and when we do grant licenses for delivery and for social consumption, that there will be some period of exclusivity to be determined at a future point. Some period of exclusivity for those categories of applicants that Commissioner Title articulated. I do think we are committing to some period of exclusivity in a policy sense. We are not saying the specific number of years because we're not comfortable saying that yet. But I thought, listening to Commissioner Title, and what I agreed with in her recommendation was that pairing the delay or the deferral with agreeing to some period of exclusivity if and when we do authorize those licenses in the future.
That is the essence of the proposal, yes.
Okay, so I think it really is a two-part thing. It's not just deferring, it's deferring with agreement that we're going to offer some period of exclusivity once we do, if and when we do authorize these license categories. So how do you feel about that now? First of all, does that make sense? Yeah, at least.
Yeah, no, here's my basic concern is I genuinely feel like I don't have enough information about what the impacts will be because we haven't studied it. I think it could be an amazing idea. I just don't know. That's my concern. I don't feel like I have adequate information to vote for it. That's what I was saying before. I feel like I have adequate information to say we should look at this and look at what the impacts of delaying delivery and social consumption are, and look at what we can do to balance the delay with our mission on social justice and our mission to assist Massachusetts farmers, and figure out how that balances and come up with regulations by February. It's I almost feel like it's a cart before the horse thing, and it may just be for me personally because I'm not familiar with this area. But that's where I'm at mentally. I feel like I'm committing to something before I understand it.
I agree with Commissioner Doyle. It feels like we're saying we're definitely going to do something my concern is that we don't yet know what the implications are, what we're definitely agreeing to do. So it's if we need to take a look at the issues, we need to be able to kind of take a look at the entire issue and figure out what does it mean to provide preferences and what are the implications of that, and then move forward from there. Okay, we know this is what the implications are, this is how we're going to pursue that and provide equity in this category. So yeah, I agree with what Commissioner just said.
Wasn't there a caveat about the legal ramifications that we were going to look at, and then make a decision based upon that? Okay. I just feel like I missed that.
No, that was explicitly part of it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Fennell.
So the entire point of this proposal is that we are instituting a delay to study the issue. And while we institute that delay, we make up for the ramifications of that delay by instituting some type of exclusivity. I'm fine with not including a time period so that we can research that, and then use the delay to address the concerns.
I agree.
Ask a question.
Go ahead, please.
So if we find out that, say we find out there are legal, and I know nothing about
I'm sorry,
cannabis.
Commissioner Fennell, I didn't hear what you said.
Say we find out there are legal ramifications of this, and I don't know cannabis law like you do, and I'm not an attorney like Commissioners Doyle and McBride, but if we do find out that there are legal ramifications to this, and we have to change course, does this give us the option to do that?
Sure.
How about,
we're not locked in, I should say.
how about this? This is a post-compromise, which probably, as always, all compromises are the worst of all worlds, both worlds. How about, since the objective is to offset the impact of the delay, how about if we use language, and don't take this is not legal language, it's just both, through exclusivity or and/or other measures agreed to by the commission?
No, that makes the entire proposal meaningless.
Okay, I just.
But thank you for the
I'm trying.
So as long as we have an alternative route, if we find out that there are legal problems, then I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, shall we vote?
Unless there are other questions or comments. So did you catch that bit about the alternatives if there are legal barriers to the exclusivity issue? Would you say that again, please, Commissioner Tuttle, or Commissioner Flanagan?
If we find out that there are legal problems with this and we are able to take another route besides what has been said, then I'm comfortable. As long as it's open-ended, that if we find out that there are problems, we're not locked into this, then I think.
Well, I think the tension, as I understand it among the commissioners, is that Commissioner Title is proposing that exclusivity is tied to certain license types, and the commission would be taking a public vote to commit to kind of studying that and then putting it into some sort of draft form. But there is some concern on the part of the other commissioners that they don't, while they may agree, I think in spirit with the concept of exclusivity, not tying it to specific license types.
But that's not the legal. The legal issue is separate. The legal issue is Commissioner Flanagan's, which is we're not locking ourselves into something if the legal study says it's not. Whether it's a good idea or a bad idea is not a legal issue. So whether it's a good idea to make that commitment right now is not a legal issue. Commissioner Flanagan's question was about flexibility if there's a legal problem, which I think the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. So now I think in the judgment of each of the individual commissioners, is this a good idea or not from a policy standpoint?
Right, because I'm torn between, again, trusting my fellow commissioners and not having the benefit of being able to collaborate behind closed doors and do this privately instead of publicly. Commissioner Title is saying that she's worked in cannabis law enough to know that this wouldn't be a problem. Commissioner McBride is saying that there could be legal problems from this. So my compromise in the middle is to say, if we can do what Commissioner Title wants us to do, and we can alleviate the concerns of Commissioner McBride, so we leave it open-ended, then let's do that. Because we're not tying ourselves that if some kind of legal ruling comes back and says you can't do 5 years, equity licenses only, then we can divert and we can try to do what we think is right and get to the same end goal. So that's my conflict.
And to be clear, my concern is not about the license categories. That's not at all my concern. My concern is purely about how what the framework is around this concept of exclusivity. Right. What it means, what the time period is, how it's constructed. Mm-hmm. That's what my concern is, and I just don't know what the implications are if we decide to do 5 years versus 3 years versus 1 year, calling it a pilot program, calling it something else. How we kind of.
Well, we'll figure that out. I think.
But I mean, I guess this is where again I go back to my risk averse lawyer piece is like okay, well what am I agreeing to here so that I'm not agreeing to something that then tomorrow we come back and go, wait, there was confusion.
Yeah, well, I actually was going to head in that direction right now just because I think this is really important, and I appreciate the 15 minutes of draft that Commissioner Title and Christine did. I actually think we should vote on what we understand right now, draft, write it up explicitly tonight. I don't want to leave it open-ended, so I want to vote on it, but then I want to come back with very explicit language more, just make sure that I think we did this once in December. Make sure that the language is exactly what we all intended, because this is a complicated.
The language of the policy votes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'd like to see the language of that policy very explicitly written out, so we all have a chance to review it overnight.
Isn't it written out though?
It is written
It's been changed
several times in the last 5 minutes, and so I'm not sure that I have a complete sense of the exact words.
Can I try one more time? to
Please, go,
clarify?
if you can do that, so that you have explicit language, that's great, go for it.
Okay, maybe you could follow along on the paper that we just wrote up. Okay, so eliminating social consumption and delivery from draft regulations and explicitly prohibiting them. Agreeing to exclusivity for equity applicants and farmers for social consumption licenses for an unspecified period of time. Agreeing to exclusivity for delivery for equity applicants, micro businesses, and co-ops for an unspecified period of time. And coming back as a commission within 2 weeks to discuss an action plan related to addressing the concerns that are the reason for a delay of social consumption and delivery.
And then what about the October and January or February timeframes?
If folks want to leave that out, I'm fine with leaving that
I
out.
prefer not. I prefer to have an explicit timeframe, as I said earlier.
Okay, and so then my suggestion would be the same timeline that we already agreed to for reconsidering smoking and environmental standards and delivery only, which was to collect information by October 31st, 2018, and then within 3 months from that date as the commission to not promulgate, but adopt regulations.
I think
Thank you for drawing that.
we said 4 months because we said agreed to do it in February, not January.
4 months,
Right.
by the end of February.
Does that give everybody, thank you, Commissioner Title, does that give everybody enough to vote on? So can I have a motion? Thank you very much. Can I have a motion therefore to,
So moved.
can I have a second, please?
Second.
Okay, let the record show that Commissioner Flanagan made a motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Title. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Is that an aye or?
Yeah.
So, all opposed? Let the record show that the Commissioners Title, Flanagan, McBride, and Hoffman voted in favor. Commissioner Doyle voted against. The motion is approved 4-1. Thank you very much. Personally, thank you, Commissioner Title, for helping us through what is, I think, an incredibly important and complicated issue. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody else as well. Commissioner, I'm sorry. How should I refer to you? I hate saying Christine. So is it just counsel or general counsel?
Council is fine too.
Okay, council.
I would also recommend that you take a vote on eliminating from the
Yeah,
regulations.
I was about to do that, yeah. So the second vote on this topic is to eliminate from the draft regulations and therefore the regulations that we're going to vote on next week and promulgate by the 15th of March, eliminate all references to delivery and to social consumption other than explicitly prohibiting them. Any questions or comments on that? Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show that that was approved unanimously by the Commission. Thank you very much. I don't even know what comes next. I think social consumption is no longer necessary to discuss. Are there any? The only social consumption issue that I'd like to put on the table, unless anybody else has other social consumption issues to put on the table, is the issue of town rights with respect to social consumption. And I don't know if that's a regulation as much as how are we addressing that issue, or is that something we should discuss at another time? I'm just concerned that if we are going to revisit social consumption in the time frame that we just agreed to, we need to resolve the issue with respect to city and town rights with respect to social consumption.
So I was hoping we could talk about that, and I maybe be too aggressive in my timeline, but on the March 13th, I think I may be getting that date wrong. The Tuesday after we file the regs, talk about that at that meeting. Talk about municipal issues that aren't things that we regulate in the regulations.
I'm fine with that.
It would be an effort for the Ways and Means.
Oh yeah, I think
Oh,
we'll
okay,
figure out
I'm
a time to
sorry.
do it, but in that time frame, because we have to testify with respect to our 2019 budget to Ways and Means that day.
Okay.
But we'll figure that out. But in that time frame, is that okay?
That's fine with me.
Any, is that okay with everybody else? Because I just worry that this issue is in comp condition. If we don't have, start addressing it, it might conflict with the timeline we just agreed upon.
Totally agree.
Okay. So any other social consumption issues before I move on? No? Okay. Research facilities, again, we're still under categories of licenses. So research facility, I'm not aware of any issues with respect to research facility as a category of license. Is that correct? Independent testing labs, there was an issue about adding language about indirect compensation. Is that technical that should be deferred to next week, or?
Does anyone have any policy concerns with that?
So let's defer that to next week as a technical issue. And then the last category is transporter. In the draft regulations that we promulgated in December, we did not allow for warehousing. There has been some pushback that if the requirement is that anything that you don't deliver from one marijuana establishment to another is not done overnight, that you have to go back to the origination point as opposed to warehousing. I've done some research between December and now. Other states allow for warehousing. We don't have regulations yet to talk about what the operational requirements are. I'm happy to work with our council between now and next week to put together those operational requirements in the form of draft regulations. But my recommendation is that we consider approving warehousing for marijuana distributors, subject to our approval of the actual regulations and operating requirements.
Yep. No, my face was.
I
made a face and I
I'm getting used to you
apologize.
making faces at me. I'm just trying to interpret which face it was.
Well, it was someone, and I don't know who it was, commented, and I think it's actually a good point of order, so to speak, is that when we're talking about transporting marijuana between establishments, we might want to call it transportation. When we're talking about bringing marijuana to customers or consumers, call it delivery.
Well, it's called transport.
Yeah, no, but when you were just speaking, you said delivery, and I went,
No, sorry.
Yeah,
This
no.
train is
That was
absolutely,
my
sorry for
face.
the lack of precision in my language. Clearly, this is solely for transportation.
Okay.
Between marijuana establishments.
Sure.
So, so I'm going to suggest that we defer this. We don't need to vote on this. I'll work with council to come up with draft regulations for this for next week. Okay, thank you. Fees and fines.
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Can
Please
we
go
go
ahead.
back to research facility for a
Absolutely.
minute? I don't feel very
No, I'm sorry,
strongly
you
about
missed your
this.
opportunity.
No, I'm sorry about that. I don't feel very strongly about this, but I received some feedback, and you all may have as well, that the permission for a research facility to have a retail license seemed unusual and not in line with other research facilities, and it was suggested that we remove that, and I tend to agree with that.
Sure. I don't have strong feelings about it.
Did somebody remind me why we put it in the first place? What was the logic?
I think it was me. I think the thought was that it may help fund the research to have the opportunity to do something with any marijuana use. Because as much as we may think that the more urgent research needs are things like drug interactions, I'm always more medicinally focused, but there may be people who want to research in a manner that is focused more on producing certain characteristics of a strain and things like that. So I was thinking it might assist in that research, but I am certainly not tied to it. I do think it may limit funding.
Okay.
So that was the thought behind it.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Tyler. I think unless people have objections, I think it makes sense to remove it. Are there any objections to removing? Okay. We need to vote on this, Christine? I think we did. Okay, so can I have a motion to remove the ability to have a retail license from the research facility license?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, let the record show that Commissioner Tyler made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show that it was unanimously approved by the commission. Thank you. Fees and fines, there's two pieces to, I guess there's three pieces to this. One is, we did get some pushback on specific fees for specific categories of licenses in terms of both the application fee and in terms of the annual license fees. I don't have a recommendation to change any of them, but I'm more than happy to entertain any recommendations to change a specific fee. Go ahead, Commissioner Tuttle.
Is this a discussion with regard to any fees?
It's with regard to, yeah, I mean, it is, but my specific statement that I didn't see any need to make any changes was to application fees by category and annual license fees by category.
Okay. In terms of application fees, we received some feedback from outdoor farmers that felt that the regulations in general disfavored them as compared to indoor growers. And so one of the suggestions to remedy that would be to lower the fees for them.
Application fee or
the
annual fee?
application fees and the license fees.
And the license fees.
I tend to agree with that. And I think incentives for outdoor growers in general for environmental reasons are a good idea as a policy matter.
Well, we talked about what California is doing, which is taking that to kind of an amazing extreme. That makes sense. I'm willing, if it's okay with the rest of the commission, to go back into the worksheet, come up with a recommendation, and review it with the group tomorrow.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
that's fine.
But-
We're talking about cultivation tomorrow, so that
Yeah, that's-
ties in.
So while I'm doing that, are there other, thank you, are there other categories of either application fees or annual license fees that people would like to reconsider? Because I'll put that into my analysis as well, if there are other categories. Okay, so I'll commit to have that done tonight, circulated tonight, and we'll discuss it tomorrow. Second is, as our executive director, when he was discussing the technology contracts that we signed, and those are signed, by the way, correct?
One of them.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to set you up this.
One of them is signed and one of them is
Please tell me that the licensing software is signed.
It is, as I understand it, have not
Okay.
received it yet.
Good, okay. Anyway, when we discussed.
So work is going on.
Work, it's okay, that's the most important thing. When we discussed these contracts last week, with respect to the seed sale tracking, there was an open issue about the $40, I think it's $40 per month per licensee to get into the Cranwell system. And we agreed that we would discuss whether we would pay, the commission would pay that for all licensees, whether the commission would pay for no licensees and make it a licensee responsibility, or whether for some categories of licensees we would pay that. It's a difficult conversation to have because we have no idea how many applications and how many licenses we're going to have, and so it's hard to estimate the impact on the commission. But if you're talking just for numbers, if you're talking $500 per year or $40 a month for 12 months, and you're talking about 100 licensees, just as number, that's, if my math is correct, that's $50,000 a year, which is non-trivial. If it's more than 100 licensees, and we agree to cover this for all licensees, it goes up from there. My opinion is we should at least consider for some categories of licensees, particularly economic empowerment, perhaps co-ops, perhaps micro-businesses, we should consider covering the $40 a month fee. But I put that for debate and discussion by the rest of the commission, but my opinion is that we should, for some categories, pick up that $40 a month fee. Other thoughts, Commissioner Tuttle?
That's exactly what I was going to propose, that the commission pay the fee for equity applicants, micro-businesses, and co-ops.
Now, there's two parts to this, by the way, just so that there's no lack of clarity. There's a and correct me if I'm wrong, there's $40 a month just to be part of the system, and then each licensee pays for tags.
Correct.
And can you just, they're 75 cents a tag, or?
45 cents for a plant tag and 25 cents for a package tag.
And you have negotiated those rates for multiple years, if I'm
Those
correct?
are locked into the contract.
Yeah. So that, we can discuss it. My proposal was not to cover the cost of the tags, just to cover the $40 a month of the connection fee, if you will.
Me too.
And similarly, as it pertains to cooperatives where they have multiple locations, we negotiate with Metric that a cooperative would be one license for this system, so long as they designate a system administrator, so there's one central point of contact, where otherwise if you're governing that, it would be up to 6 different access points, and that would be 6 different locations.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for doing that.
I would like to acknowledge Executive Director Collins for his negotiation skills.
I'm sorry, no applause.
Until they're signed.
Any comments on the proposal that I made or that Commissioner Tuttle endorsed?
I'm assuming this is all in the budget and we're not concerned about budget
No,
stress?
we're not. With the metric contract, particularly if the, I have no idea how to estimate, but a significant proportion of licensees will pay both the $40 a month and the tag fee. The metric, tell me if I'm wrong, but the metric system is going to come in well under what we have in our budget. So I think we have the flexibility to do what Commissioner Title and I suggested. I can do the math if you tell me how many co-op applications and licenses we're going to have, how many micro-business it's just hard to do the math without knowing that. But as I said, just as a rounding error, if you take 100, it's $50,000 a year, which is more than the gap that we have based upon the metric coming in below our estimated in our current budget. So the answer is we do have the financial flexibility to do this.
Okay, do we need to make a reservation about any legal concerns? Is it the same as the other issue where we're distinguishing between different kinds of applicants?
Do you have a concern about that, Counsel?
Equity, I have to, because I have not looked at that issue.
Okay.
I think that there's a reasonable basis in the statute as to why you're having some folks not have to pay the fees versus others. That seems acceptable to me, but I have not done any.
I mean, we've already agreed previously to waive the fees for some categories of applicants in the draft regulations.
Oh, okay.
So to me, this is hopefully no different.
Yep, no, I'm just asking the
Yeah.
question.
No, I think it's a
Don't
great
know the
question.
answer.
Great question to ask. Okay, so can I have, I think the motion is specifically to waive the monthly, what's the technical term for these fees, Shen? Is it monthly connection fees, or what's the technical term? Pardon?
Seat to sale.
No, I know what seat sale tracking system is, but what's the $40?
Monthly service fee.
Pardon? Monthly service fee, thank you. So the proposal is to waive the monthly service fee for co-ops, micro-businesses, and economic empowerment licensees.
Equity applicants.
I'm sorry, equity applicant, I apologize. So equity applicants, co-ops, and micro-businesses. So can I have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
And a second, please?
Second.
Let the record show that Commissioner Tanner made a motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Flanagan, I'm sorry.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Let the record show that was approved unanimously by the Commission. So I will thank you, and I will come back tomorrow with the fee structure, proposed fee structure based upon the earlier conversation with respect to cultivation. I'm not sure why this ended up here, RMD priority applicants, in terms of fees and fines. So I'll come back to that. I think that's an important conversation, but it doesn't belong here. So if we go to dot 101, application requirements, there was quite a bit of feedback in terms of economic empowerment prior applicants and how they were defined, and some suggestions for additional categorization. So I think that's the next topic for conversation. And I don't know if I have a complete list, but it was to include sexual orientation and gender identities, include owners convicted of drug crimes, narrow type of drug crimes that would be included, and then what kind of information will be required to prove that these conditions are in place. I'm not sure there's a complete list of the comments we've gotten, but those are pretty frequent comments on this issue.
I'm happy to start.
Oh, would you please? Thank you, Commissioner Title.
Okay, very open to everyone's feedback on each of these, and I want to thank the people who brought them to our attention as well. Starting with modifying definition, the suggestion to add race was brought up by several individuals, the Market Participation Subcommittee, and the ACLU, among others. Now, the economic empowerment priority is a list of 5 different criteria, and in order to qualify, an applicant would need to meet 2 of them. I propose, and again, very open to feedback on this, that we do add race as a 6th factor, and in line with the general principles that when race is being considered, it should be part of the overall metric, but not the deciding factor, that we would then have 6 factors, the 5 that we've already agreed to, and then 6, which would be the majority of ownership belonging to individuals from Black or African American or Hispanic or Latino descent, based on disproportionate impact. That would be the 6th factor.
And it would be 3 of 6 or 2 of 6?
Then it would be 3 of 6 in my recommendation.
And can you help me, when you say race, what does that mean in terms of?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. So we would look to.
I'm sorry, I apologize if that's an ignorant question.
It is not. It is a good question. We would look to other applications of this type, which ask for race. My suggestion would be that we ask for documentation and leave it open-ended. Something like a birth certificate, something like a arrest documentation, various types of official documents would list race.
I guess I was asking a different question,
Oh.
probably even one that's even dumber.
Oh.
What races would qualify as a yes or a check mark? in this
Oh, I just
category?
said that. Okay, maybe
Oh, did you? Did I
didn't
miss that?
articulate.
Okay, I
So,
apologize if I missed that.
So my suggestion would be that the criterion be majority of ownership belonging to individuals from Black/African American or Hispanic/Latino descent.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry if I missed that. So, you're making a very specific proposal that we had a 6-category race and that it's 3 of 6 with the documentation requirements that you just articulated. Any comments or questions on that?
Just a question on the 2 race categories. Is there something particular we're relying on? Is there like something we can just point to and say this is why?
Sure. I would point to the ACLU Black and White War on Drugs report.
Right. Was that the one Matt Allen testified about at our stakeholder
Yeah,
session? Okay.
That's it.
Yep.
Commissioner Flanagan?
I understand the report. I realize who wrote it. But my concern is that other parts of the state have big populations of different races. Why just those 2? And I get we're trying to do social equity, and I get that when we look at arrest data and all that, but I just feel that we're limiting it if we're looking at just those 2 races based on one report by one organization.
Okay, so the initial 5 factors that pointed to areas of disproportionate impact that we came to together as a group, those were race neutral, right? So those factors are still there in the initial 5. So we're adding race as a 6th. And the feedback that we got was that by not including race, we are disregarding what is generally considered, by overwhelming evidence, not just the ACLU report, that when we're defining disproportionately harmed communities and leaving out race, that we are omitting a very significant factor. That's the feedback that we got. Does that help answer the question?
Is it?
Yeah, it just doesn't change my thought process, though. I don't know. Okay.
Commissioner McBride?
I mean, I'm wondering, is there a way to take into consideration, to include what Commissioner Title is saying, what also I think Accountability Commissioner Flanagan is saying, by wording it in a way that is something along the lines of, this is going to be perfect, but concept of a majority of owners, right? Owners come from a minority population in the area disproportionately affected. You know, something like that, so that if we're, in other words, I think that, we're talking maybe about areas of the state where there may be immigrants from other, from areas of the world, like, I'm thinking of Laotian, and Brazilian, like where there may be other kind of minority categories, right? That isn't necessarily Latino, Hispanic. So, is there a way to kind of accommodate that? I think when you think of like the same categories of the state potentially,
Yeah.
the Lowells and
Because when I look at this towns of just that we came to this point, I mean, Amherst, Munson, Fitchburg, like, is there's Brazilian populations, there's Cambodian populations, there's all kinds of populations.
Well, so just as a point of clarification, if you already reside in one of those cities, you would already meet those other factors, right? So this is more to account for people who don't reside in those cities, but are part of the races that overwhelmingly evidence shows has been disproportionately targeted.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions or comments? Commissioner Doyle?
No, I'm just staring at language.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just would like to say that I have not had an opportunity to look at whether putting a category in based on a protected category would raise any legal concerns. And whether, in other words, other governmental agencies are entitled to, in similar contexts, take into consideration race, for example. So I'm not able to opine one way or the other whether I feel comfortable with that.
Can we put in the legal reservation?
How would you suggest that?
Just, okay.
Literally vote on it subject to,
Subject to legal.
you know, like we did before with the other vote.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would note that I didn't put it into the initial regulations because I did feel some hesitance and uncertainty, but at this point we have more data. It's one metric out of 6. We're targeting it to just Black and Latino. We have the statutory mandate, so we should consider all of those factors, but I can understand voting either way on it.
Okay. And that means you're confident that the past legal review, but putting in the caveat is okay.
I'm sorry?
You're confident it will pass legal review, but putting in the caveat is okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can I have a motion to approve that addition to the categories? It's proposed subject to legal review.
So moved.
Have a second, please?
Second.
Let the commissioner, let's let the show Commissioner Title made the motion to approve. Commissioner Doyle seconded. All in favor? All opposed?
Yay.
So let the record show that Commissioners Title, McBride, Hoffman, and Doyle voted to approve. Commissioner Flanagan voted against. The motion carries 4-1. Thank you. Are there other issues with respect to the requirements for economic empowerment priority applicants?
If I may address each of them.
Sure,
Chair?
please.
Including sexual orientation and gender identities. One of the places that this came up was in terms of the diversity plan, which is actually in a different section, which I'm going to bring up very quickly. Because I want to make sure I take accountability for this because it was my mistake. Okay, so in terms of the suitability for all applicants, one item they would have to submit is diversity plans to promote equity among minorities, women, veterans, people with disabilities, and people of all gender identities. And I simply overlooked people of all sexual orientations. So I would suggest that we add that in the diversity plan.
Okay. Any objections to that?
No, I have a question though. Can you just remind me where that is? Is that in the application section or in the?
Yes, that is in the application section on page 19 under management and operations profile.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So if there are no objections, is that a required vote, Council? So can I have a motion to approve the addition of sexual orientation to the regulations in the section you referred to?
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Okay, I think Commissioner Doyle beat you. So let the record show Commissioner McBride made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show that the Commissioner approved that unanimously. Thank you. Okay.
Next, include owners convicted of drug crimes. My suggestion would be not to, because we have included that in the equity applicants. I don't think that by itself having a drug crime would is the most relevant criteria in terms of whether you have provided economic empowerment to the community.
Any objections to that? So that's no change to the
There's
existing
no
regulations, so there's no need to vote on it unless there are objections? Okay, thank you.
Next, narrow types of drug crimes. I would invite whoever put that on the agenda to elaborate more. My suggestion would be no, because the statute specifically says for this priority, someone who demonstrates experience in or business practices that promote economic empowerment communities disproportionately impacted by high rates of arrest and incarceration for offenses under Chapter 94C of the federal laws. And so that's why there is a reference to Chapter 94C in particular, and that's why it's not narrow.
I don't, is anybody,
I put it on there, just,
you're fine?
I don't- yep.
Okay, so there's no change again to the draft regulations, so there's no vote needed. And then last, about required information.
So I'm open on thoughts to this. That's a conversation that I intended to have with our director of licensing as we go through the application drafting process.
So there's really no, that's not really a regulatory issue?
Yeah, I mean, I put it on just because there are strict regulations that by DCGIS about what you can ask people to provide to substantiate, and we can't be asking for something like a court, right? So it's basically just making sure that we are clear that we can't ask, and then what we're doing in order to make sure that something qualifies.
Could you and I work together on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to propose, first of all, everybody on the commission is able to go to 3 o'clock, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to propose that we take a short break and power up and get ready for like a very productive hour and a half. So if we can reconvene at 1:30 and we'll get started again, and then we'll go till 3 o'clock. I think we've made a lot of progress. So.